2 days before Christmas, my father slid a massive stack of papers across the kitchen island and demanded I serve 30 millionaire investors for my brother's holiday retreat. They expected me to scrub floors, cook gourmet meals, and remain entirely invisible like a dutiful unpaid servant. I simply smiled, picked up the crumpled $100 bill my brother threw at my feet, and agreed. They had absolutely no idea that instead of buying groceries, I would use that money for an airport taxi and fly straight to Hawaii, leaving them to face a house full of hungry billionaires with an empty fridge. But the panic on their faces when they realized I was gone was nothing compared to the devastating secret I was about to unleash on them all. I am Clara, 34 years old, and somehow still navigating the incredible audacity of my own flesh and blood. As the undercover chief executive officer of a multi-million-dollar hospitality empire, I had long ago escaped their financial grip, but chose to stay in their basement to protect a massive secret. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who severely underestimated your true worth. Growing up in our affluent Connecticut suburb, everything revolved around maintaining an illusion of absolute perfection. That illusion was entirely centered around my older brother Tristan. At 36, he was the undisputed golden child of the family, a flashy tech startup founder whose entire existence was funded by my parents' endless sacrifices and blind devotion. The reality of our family dynamic reached its breaking point exactly 48 hours before Christmas. I was sitting at the kitchen island nursing a cup of black coffee when a heavy 5-page document slapped hard against my chest and slid onto my lap. I looked up to see my father Thomas glaring down at me with his usual expression of profound disappointment. "Read it and memorize it," he demanded, crossing his arms over his chest. "We do not have time for your usual incompetence." Tristan strutted into the kitchen right behind him, adjusting the cuffs of a custom-tailored suit that I knew for a fact cost more than my parents' monthly mortgage. He flashed his signature arrogant grin and leaned against the marble counter. "My entire board of investors from Silicon Valley is flying in for a massive holiday retreat," Tristan announced, puffing out his chest. "That means 30 high-net-worth individuals will be staying at this estate. It is the biggest weekend of my career, and everything needs to be utterly flawless." My mother Patricia rushed in behind him, nodding furiously as she adjusted her expensive pearl necklace. She pointed a manicured finger directly at my face. "You heard your brother, Clara. That list on your lap contains all the dietary restrictions. We have a half-dozen vegans, 3 strict gluten-free requests, 2 severe peanut allergies, and they all expect A5-grade Wagyu beef for the main Christmas Eve dinner. You will handle all the grocery shopping, cooking, and deep cleaning. And for heaven's sake, wear a plain black uniform. I want you completely out of sight while serving. Do not wander around in your usual rags and embarrass this family in front of Tristan's guests." At that moment, my sister-in-law, Nia, walked into the kitchen. Nia was a striking African-American woman who had given up her own promising career in corporate communications to support Tristan's endless entrepreneurial delusions. She carried a sleek designer handbag and looked down at the floor with an exaggerated sigh. "Tristan, can we please get the driveway repaved?" Nia complained, brushing an imaginary speck of dust off her red-bottom heels. "My shoes are getting absolutely ruined walking up to this house. It is ridiculous that your investors have to see this mess." Patricia immediately rushed over to comfort her golden daughter-in-law. "Oh, do not worry about a little dirt, Nia," my mother cooed, throwing a disparaging look in my direction. "Clara is completely used to the dirt. Do you remember when she could not afford a college dormitory and had to sleep in the back of her beat-up Honda Civic for an entire semester? She is tough as nails. She can handle scrubbing the driveway clean before she finishes prepping the vegan truffles." The casual cruelty in my mother's voice was a sharp reminder of the past. They had happily watched me face homelessness at 19, refusing to co-sign a simple student loan while simultaneously draining their savings accounts to buy Tristan a brand new sports car for his graduation. They genuinely believed I was the ultimate failure of the family, a useless spinster who baked for a living and lived in their basement like a parasite. They had absolutely no clue that the small catering gig I started in my 20s had quietly exploded into apex culinary and concierge, an elite hospitality empire catering exclusively to the ultra-rich. I had millions in offshore accounts and property deeds bearing my name, but I had stayed in this miserable basement playing the part of the struggling daughter for one very specific strategic reason. I looked down at the incredibly demanding menu requirements resting on my lap. To hire a professional firm for this level of luxury catering on a major holiday would cost tens of thousands of dollars. Instead, they expected me, the daughter they treated like a peasant, to pull off a culinary miracle for free while hiding in the shadows. Tristan scoffed at my silence. He reached into his designer wallet, pulled out a single crumpled $100 bill, and tossed it casually onto the floor right at my feet. "Consider that a little tip in advance," he sneered. "Do not embarrass me, Clara. My entire future relies on these investors feeling pampered. If you mess up the Wagyu, I will personally make sure Dad kicks you out of this house for good." I looked at the $100 bill resting against the kitchen tile. Then I looked at my parents, who were beaming at Tristan with sickening pride. I did not yell. I did not cry. I did not throw the thick packet of dietary demands back in their faces. Instead, I calmly reached down and picked up the crumpled green bill. I smoothed out the edges, stood up, and flashed them the most radiant, perfect smile I could muster. "Oh, I promise," I said, my voice dangerously calm and sweet. "This will be a Christmas no one will ever forget." They smiled back, completely unaware that they had just sealed their own fate. Without another word, I turned and walked down the narrow stairs to the dark basement room I pretended to call home. I locked the door behind me and immediately kicked aside a pile of cheap old laundry baskets to reveal a hidden compartment in the floorboards. I pulled out my custom Louis Vuitton luggage set, the one my family had no idea I owned, and grabbed my private encrypted phone. I hit a single speed dial button and waited for my luxury travel concierge to answer. "Get me the first-class red-eye to Maui," I instructed, tossing the $100 bill onto my pristine bed. I have a sudden urge to spend Christmas on the beach. The air in the basement was notoriously damp, a deliberate choice by my parents, who adamantly refused to insulate the lower level of their sprawling Connecticut estate. They claimed it was a waste of resources for a storage space, completely disregarding the fact that I had lived down there for 3 years. I dragged my custom Louis Vuitton trunk from behind the massive water heater. It was a limited edition piece purchased in Paris shortly after Apex Culinary acquired its third international hospitality contract. I unzipped the thick canvas cover and began filling it with my actual wardrobe. Silk slip dresses, tailored linen trousers, and a pair of vintage Chanel sunglasses took the place of the oversized faded sweaters I wore around the house. I had worn those ugly sweaters to keep my family comfortable with their fabricated narrative of my perpetual failure. I packed precisely, leaving behind every black uniform, every stained apron, and every trace of the obedient daughter they firmly believed they owned. I snapped the golden clasps shut. The sharp metallic sound echoed in the quiet basement, signaling the definitive end of an era. I grabbed my cashmere coat and my leather tote, feeling the heavy, reassuring weight of my corporate phone inside. I carried the heavy trunk up the narrow wooden stairs, my silent footsteps practically a trained reflex after years of avoiding my family's unpredictable wrath. The main floor of the house was suffocatingly still. Moonlight filtered through the grand bay windows, casting long, pale shadows across the imported Persian rugs my mother prized above all else. I paused in the grand hallway, my gaze locking onto the massive, oil-painted family portrait hanging above the mahogany console table. Thomas and Patricia sat regally in the center, flanked by a beaming Tristan and his pristine wife, Nia. I had to squint to find myself in the composition. The artist had been instructed to position me, standing in the far back corner, quite literally obstructed by a large decorative potted fern. The visual metaphor was staggering, a daily reminder of my place in their hierarchy. Looking at Tristan's painted wrist, I vividly recalled the flash of gold from his heavy Rolex. I was 17, working triple shifts at a local diner to save for my college tuition. I went to the bank to withdraw my deposit only to find an account balance of absolutely zero. Thomas had emptied it the day before. He later justified the theft by claiming Tristan needed a luxury watch to project the right image for his fraternity alumni interviews. Your brother has real potential to lead this family, Thomas had told me, not even bothering to look up from his newspaper. You need to understand that family sacrifices are necessary for the greater good. The greater good in their eyes always meant Tristan. I turned my back on the arrogant painting and walked straight into the sprawling chef's kitchen, the very room where I was expected to perform culinary miracles for 30 venture capitalists over the next 48 hours. The granite island was still cluttered with Tristan's absurd 5-page dietary requirement list. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the crumpled $100 bill Tristan had so graciously tossed at my feet like I was a beggar. I smoothed out the wrinkled green paper against the cold stone countertop. Reaching over to the magnetic knife block, I slid out the heaviest steel butcher knife we owned. The blade gleamed in the dim light. With one fluid, forceful motion, I drove the blade straight down through the center of the $100 bill, pinning it deeply into the expensive granite island with a loud crack. I grabbed a thick black marker from the utility drawer and scrawled a message across the back of Tristan's dietary demand list. Bought myself a cocktail. Enjoy the cooking. I propped the note right next to the embedded knife, a monument to my final act of servitude. The freezing December wind hit my face the second I opened the front door, but the biting cold felt incredibly refreshing. At the end of the long, snow-dusted driveway, a sleek black SUV sat idling its headlights, cutting through the heavy winter darkness. The driver stepped out immediately, taking my heavy trunk and opening the rear door with practiced professionalism. I slid into the heated leather seat, the quiet hum of the engine wrapping around me like a protective shield. Take me to the private terminal, I told the driver, settling back against the headrest. As the vehicle pulled away and navigated the winding suburban roads, I stared out the tinted window. I watched the imposing silhouette of my parents' house shrink in the rearview mirror until it completely disappeared into the winter night. I felt no guilt, no hesitation, and no remorse. I felt only the absolute certainty of my impending freedom. Fast forward 18 hours. The bitter cold of Connecticut was entirely replaced by the golden tropical warmth of Maui. I was reclining on a plush sunbed overlooking the crystal-clear Pacific Ocean, the rhythmic sound of crashing waves providing the perfect soundtrack to my newfound peace. A cabana boy set a freshly crafted Mai Tai on the small wooden table beside me, the condensation dripping down the glass. I took a slow, deliberate sip, letting the sweet rum and pineapple juice settle the lingering travel fatigue. Then my corporate phone began to vibrate violently against the table. I glanced at the glowing screen. It was completely erupting. The display showed 47 missed calls from Patricia, followed by a relentless flood of frantic text messages. "Where are you? The guests are here. The house is freezing. Tristan is furious. Answer your phone right now." The 30 Silicon Valley 5 IPs had arrived at the Connecticut estate. They had walked into a freezing, completely empty house with no heat, no staff, and absolutely zero food. The fallout had officially begun. The Maui sun was a perfect 82 degrees. I adjusted my designer sunglasses and watched the turquoise waves gently lap against the pristine white sand of Wailea Beach. A gentle trade wind rustled the palm fronds overhead. It was absolute paradise. On the small teak table beside my lounger, my encrypted phone buzzed violently against the wood. The screen flashed with a continuous stream of notifications. 47 missed calls from Patricia, 12 from Tristan, 19 from Thomas. The sheer panic radiating through the digital signals was almost tangible. I took a slow sip of my Mai Tai, savoring the sweet blend of rum and fresh pineapple juice. I let the phone ring 3 more times before I finally tapped the green accept button for a FaceTime video call. Instantly, the serene sound of the ocean was drowned out by a cacophony of overlapping shouts. My father's face filled the screen, Thomas was practically vibrating with rage, his face a deep mottled purple. Behind him, the sprawling Connecticut kitchen looked exactly as I had left it. Cold, empty, and completely devoid of the lavish holiday feast they had expected me to magically produce. "What on earth is wrong with you, Clara?" Thomas roared into the speaker, his voice echoing off the marble countertops. "Where are you? Where is the food? Where is—" Before I could answer, my mother pushed her face into the frame. Patricia looked frantic, her perfectly coiffed hair slightly out of place, and her eyes wide with terror. "Tristan's guests are here," she hissed, her voice shrill and panicked. 30 of the most important venture capitalists in the country are standing in our foyer freezing because you did not turn up the heat. They are asking for the Wagyu beef sliders and the vegan truffles. Get up here from the basement right now and put your uniform on. I shifted the phone slightly to catch a glimpse of the background. Tristan was pacing back and forth near the kitchen island, sweating through his expensive cashmere sweater. Behind him, a group of bewildered tech investors stood huddled in their heavy winter coats, gripping their luxury leather weekend bags. They were looking around the desolate kitchen with mounting irritation. I recognized a few of them from my own corporate dealings. These were men and women who demanded perfection, and Tristan was currently offering them nothing but an unheated room and absolute chaos. Tristan was desperately trying to hand out bottled water to billionaires who were promised a 5-star culinary retreat. Nia stood near the hallway looking utterly mortified as she tried to apologize to a woman complaining about the freezing temperature. I smiled warmly at the camera. "I am not in the basement, Mom," I said, my voice perfectly smooth and unbothered. "Then where the hell are you?" Tristan yelled, shoving his way into the frame and knocking Thomas aside. "My investors are starving, Clara. You are ruining my entire career. You are humiliating me in front of the most powerful people in Silicon Valley. I gave you $100. Get to the grocery store now and fix this." I let out a soft laugh. "Oh, Tristan. I did go shopping. Just not for groceries." I tapped the icon to flip my camera lens. I panned the phone slowly across the breathtaking Hawaiian landscape. I captured the sprawling infinity pool, the private luxury cabanas, and the endless expanse of the sparkling Pacific Ocean. I made sure to properly frame the cabana boy carrying a tray of fresh coconuts in the background just to drive the point home. Then I flipped the camera back to my face. "I am on vacation, Dad," I said, taking another leisurely sip of my drink. "You always told me I needed to learn how to take a break from my baking hobby, so I took your advice. I flew to Maui." The silence on the other end of the line was absolute perfection. For 3 glorious seconds, my family was entirely speechless. I could see the gears turning in their heads, trying to comprehend how the sister they treated like an indentured servant was currently broadcasting live from a luxury Hawaiian resort. The disconnect between the subservient maid they thought they knew and the woman sipping rum on a private beach was short-circuiting their brains. Patricia broke the silence first, her voice trembling with sheer outrage. "You selfish, ungrateful brat. You left us here with 30 VIPs and no food. How could you do this to your brother? After everything we have done for you, we let you live in our home. We put a roof over your head when you had nothing." "A roof over my head," I repeated. "You mean the uninsulated concrete basement you forced me into because Tristan needed the guest rooms to store his ridiculous sneaker collection. Just like you forced me to work 3 jobs in high school while you funded his lavish fraternity trips. You let me sleep in my car during my sophomore year of college because you needed to upgrade the backyard patio. You wanted a maid, not a daughter. Well, the maid is officially off the clock. Enjoy entertaining your guests with tap water and apologies." Thomas ripped the phone back from Patricia. His eyes were bulging with a fury I had grown up fearing. But I did not fear him anymore. His red face and loud voice held absolutely no power over me. "You listen to me, you worthless mistake!" He spat, his voice dropping to a vicious, threatening growl. "I am giving you exactly 3 hours to get your pathetic self back to this house. You will walk through that back door, you will put on an apron, and you will serve these people. If you are not standing in this kitchen by the time my watch strikes 6, I will personally drag every single piece of your garbage out of that basement and throw it onto the snowy lawn. I will change every lock on the doors. You are homeless, Clara. You are utterly homeless, do you hear me? I stared into the camera, watching the man who had belittled my existence for 34 years. I did not flinch. I did not apologize. I leaned back against the plush white towel of my sunbed and gave him a smile that was sharp enough to cut glass. Change the locks. Thomas, I said, my tone dropping to a chillingly calm whisper. Throw out whatever you want. But it is going to be really awkward when the police arrest you for breaking and entering into my property. Before he could even process the words, I tapped the red button and ended the call. The phone screen went black, and Tristan stood in the center of the freezing kitchen, clutching his hair. In the adjacent living room, 30 of Silicon Valley's most ruthless venture capitalists were huddled in their cashmere overcoats, murmuring among themselves. Their breath literally formed small clouds in the unheated air. Tristan knew he had less than 10 minutes before they started calling their drivers and walking out the door, taking his $5 million funding round with them. He pulled out his phone and frantically searched for emergency elite catering in Connecticut. The top result was a company called Apex Culinary. Their website boasted of serving foreign dignitaries and Hollywood royalty. Tristan did not hesitate. He dialed the number pacing the length of the kitchen island, where Clara had pinned the crumpled $100 bill just hours earlier. A man answered with a crisp, professional tone. Tristan demanded a full holiday spread for 30 VIP guests immediately. He practically screamed into the receiver that price was not an issue, and that he was a highly successful tech founder who needed a miracle. The manager on the other end of the line remained entirely calm. He informed Tristan that an emergency holiday deployment of their elite team would require an upfront fee of $35,000. Tristan scoffed loudly, ensuring the investors in the next room could hear him. He told the manager to send the team and prepare to swipe his card. Tristan had absolutely no idea that the man on the phone was Marcus, my most trusted operations director, or that the entire Apex Culinary fleet was already idling in a commercial parking lot just 2 miles down the road, waiting for my direct signal. Less than 20 minutes later, a fleet of 3 pristine black catering vans pulled into the snowy driveway. Marcus and a team of 12 chefs and servers marched into the house with military precision. They carried portable induction burners, silver chafing dishes, and coolers packed with the exact Wagyu beef and vegan truffles Tristan had demanded earlier. The rich, savory aroma of roasting garlic and seared meat quickly began to fill the freezing air. The investors in the living room visibly relaxed, shedding their heavy coats as the caterers began pouring vintage champagne and passing around exquisite appetizers on silver platters. Tristan puffed out his chest, looking over at his father with a smug expression. He had saved the day. The golden boy had triumphed again. Marcus approached Tristan in the center of the kitchen, holding a sleek mobile payment terminal. "Sir, we are happy to accommodate your emergency request," Marcus said, his voice polite but firm. "However, company policy requires the $35,000 payment to be processed before we begin serving the main course." Tristan rolled his eyes and pulled out a heavy metal black credit card. He flashed it toward a few investors standing near the kitchen entrance, ensuring they saw the prestigious piece of metal. "Just tap it," Tristan said, waving his hand dismissively. Marcus tapped the card against the screen. The machine beeped a sharp, discordant sound. "Declined." Tristan let out a forced, hollow laugh. "It is a fraud alert," he announced loudly to the room. "It happens all the time when you have my kind of net worth. The bank gets nervous when I make large, spontaneous purchases. Just run this one." He pulled out a platinum card and shoved it into the chip reader. The machine processed for 3 seconds before beeping again. "Declined." The kitchen went completely silent. The clinking of champagne glasses in the living room suddenly stopped. Several investors exchanged knowing, skeptical glances. A tech founder who claimed to manage millions but could not clear a $35,000 catering bill was a massive red flag. Tristan's face turned a blotchy red as he frantically tapped the card again. The screen flashed the same rejection. Nia rushed into the kitchen, her face tight with embarrassment. She pushed Tristan aside and opened her own designer wallet. "Stop making a scene, Tristan," she hissed under her breath. She pulled out her personal gold card and handed it to Marcus. "I apologize for the inconvenience," she said, offering a tight customer service smile. "Please use my account." Marcus ran the card. The machine beeped one more time. Declined. Nia stared at the small digital screen as if it had offended her personally. Her perfectly manicured hands began to shake. She grabbed Tristan by the arm, her nails digging deep into his cashmere sweater, and dragged him violently into the walk-in pantry, slamming the door behind them. Through the thin wooden door, their hushed argument hissed into the quiet kitchen. "Why is my personal account frozen?" "Tristan," Nia demanded, her voice shaking with absolute rage. "You told me those temporary bridge loans I co-signed last month were fully covered by your Series A funding. You swore on your life that using my credit was just a corporate formality." Tristan stammered, his voice pitching higher in panic. "It is just a bank holiday issue, Nia. The liquid assets are tied up in an offshore holding account until Tuesday. I promise it is fine." "You lied to me," she shot back, the realization dawning on her. "You drained my accounts." Out in the kitchen, Marcus turned his attention away from the pantry door and looked directly at my father. Thomas was hovering nervously near the refrigerator, sweating profusely despite the cold temperature of the house. Sir Marcus said, his voice cutting through the tension, "I need payment right now or my team will pack up the equipment and leave immediately. Your guests look very hungry and my staff is on holiday pay." Thomas looked past Marcus into the living room. 30 of the wealthiest people he had ever met were staring right back at him with growing irritation. He looked at Patricia, who was gripping the edge of the granite counter, hyperventilating at the prospect of total social ruin. Thomas could not let his son look like a fraud. He could not allow the golden illusion to shatter in front of these powerful people. His hands trembling violently, Thomas reached into his back pocket and pulled out his worn leather wallet. He extracted a plain standard debit card, the one connected directly to his lifetime retirement savings account. "Use this," Thomas whispered, staring at the floor. Marcus inserted the card. The machine processed the transaction and chimed with a pleasant tone. "Approved." Thomas looked physically ill. He had just wiped out a massive chunk of his life savings to preserve his son's fragile ego. Marcus printed the receipt. But instead of simply handing over the slip of paper, he reached into his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a thick, formal legal envelope. The heavy parchment was sealed with a stamp of deep red wax. Marcus placed the receipt on top of the envelope and pressed it firmly into Thomas's shaking hand. "A Christmas card from our CEO," Sir Marcus said, his voice devoid of any emotion. "She hopes you enjoy the holiday." I watched the entire spectacular implosion unfold in high definition from my cabana in Maui, streaming the live video feed from the discreet security cameras I had legally installed in my own kitchen months ago. Thomas stood frozen, staring at the thick parchment envelope in his trembling hand. The heavy red wax seal felt like a physical weight, a ticking time bomb resting on his palm. Marcus, having delivered the devastating package, gave a crisp nod and signaled his elite culinary team to begin passing the hors d'oeuvres. The professional caterers seamlessly moved past the paralyzed family members, entirely ignoring the impending explosion. Patricia snatched the envelope from Thomas's weak grip. "What is this?" she demanded, her voice shrill and echoing through my phone speaker. She broke the wax seal, her manicured nails tearing frantically into the thick paper. She pulled out a stack of crisp, officially notarized legal documents. The header of the very first page was printed in bold, uncompromising black ink. "Notice of eviction and transfer of deed." Patricia's eyes darted across the documents, her face rapidly draining of all color. The expensive foundation she wore suddenly looked like a death mask. "Thomas," she whispered, the paper shaking violently in her hands. "Thomas, what does this mean?" "It says Apex Holdings, LLC, is the sole proprietor of this estate. It says we have 48 hours to vacate the premises." Thomas could not meet her eyes. He stared at the kitchen tiles, his chest heaving as the crushing reality of his long-held secret finally caught up with him. "Apex Holdings," Tristan muttered, stepping cautiously out of the pantry, where he and Nia had just been arguing. "That is the parent company of the catering service. Why does a catering service own our house?" The toxic truth hung heavily in the freezing air. I had meticulously planned this exact moment for 3 years. 3 years ago, Tristan had confidently launched a disastrous cryptocurrency venture. He had promised his investors guaranteed astronomical returns, swindling his early backers, and digging a massive financial hole that threatened federal fraud charges. To save his precious golden boy from prison, Thomas had secretly taken out a second and then a third mortgage on the family estate. He funneled every available cent of their equity into Tristan's failing scam. They defaulted within 18 months. When the bank quietly put the Connecticut estate up for private auction, my corporate acquisitions team swooped in immediately. Apex Holdings LLC purchased the property entirely in cash. I became my parents' landlord overnight. The monthly rent they had so arrogantly demanded I pay to live in that damp, freezing basement. It was a calculated, beautiful joke. I was simply letting them pay the property taxes on my own real estate, while they paraded around town pretending they still owned the mansion. Thomas. Patricia shrieked, shattering the tense silence. She shoved the eviction notice directly into his chest. You mortgaged our home. You mortgaged my home for his pathetic internet scam. I had to, Patricia. Thomas stammered, his usually authoritative voice completely destroyed. Tristan was going to face federal prison. He promised me the coin would rebound. He swore he had insider information. It was a market fluctuation, Tristan yelled defensively, stepping backward as his mother glared at him with absolute venom. I was a victim of unregulated market dynamics. You cannot blame me for the economy. I blame you for destroying my life, Patricia screamed, lunging at Tristan with her hands raised. Nia grabbed Patricia's arm, pulling her back before she could physically claw at Tristan's face. The pristine, flawless illusion of the Wilson family was disintegrating in real time. The kitchen, now smelling of seared Wagyu beef and expensive truffle oil, had become an active war zone. You parasitic little fraud! Patricia spat at Tristan, tears of absolute rage ruining her mascara. You drained my husband's retirement. You stole my house. You are nothing but a massive failure dressed in a custom suit. Do not talk to me like that, Tristan shouted, his toxic arrogance flaring up even as his world burned to ash. I am the only one with actual vision in this family. Clara is a glorified baker, and you two are dinosaurs. I will get the house back. I am closing a $5 million deal in the next room right now. The sheer audacity of Tristan's delusion pushed Thomas over the edge. Decades of blind devotion, of sacrificing his daughter's future to fund his son's endless ego, finally snapped. Thomas raised his hand and brought it across Tristan's face with a resounding, violent slap. The sharp crack echoed off the granite countertops. Tristan stumbled backward, holding his reddened cheek in absolute shock. He looked at his father as if a total stranger had just assaulted him. You have ruined us! Thomas rasped, his hands shaking violently at his sides. I gave you everything. I stole from your sister to give to you. I risked my marriage, and you have absolutely ruined us. Nia stood frozen in the corner, her eyes wide with terror as she calculated the massive debt she was now legally tied to. The golden child was officially dead. In his place stood a terrified, broke fraud who had just been struck by his own enabler. The legal documents had fluttered to the floor during the physical scuffle. A single page, the notice to vacate, rested face up near the entrance to the formal living room. Heavy, measured footsteps echoed on the hardwood floor. A tall, impeccably dressed man with silver hair walked slowly into the kitchen. It was Mr. Caldwell, the lead venture capitalist and the anchor of Tristan's highly anticipated $5 million funding round. He held a glass of vintage champagne in one hand. With the other, he calmly reached down and picked up the discarded legal document from the tile floor. The entire family froze. The screaming ceased immediately. Tristan's face went from flushed red to a sickly pale white. Mr. Caldwell adjusted his designer glasses and quietly read the bold print on the eviction notice. His expression remained utterly unreadable, a terrifying mask of corporate calculation. He looked up, his cold gaze piercing right through Tristan's custom-tailored suit. Tristan, Mr. Caldwell said, his voice deadly quiet and echoing with the weight of impending ruin. You explicitly told us you owned this estate free and clear as collateral for our $5 million investment. Mr. Caldwell's voice did not rise above a conversational volume, yet it commanded the absolute silence of the room. The remaining 29 venture capitalists, who had just been lured from the living room by the rich aroma of truffle oil and seared Wagyu beef, froze exactly where they stood. The clinking of silverware ceased immediately. Tristan stood paralyzed, the red handprint from Thomas's violent slap still burning vibrantly across his left cheek. His mouth opened and closed like a suffocated fish, but no sound emerged. The elite investors, men and women who managed financial portfolios larger than the gross domestic product of small nations, began to murmur. The whispers spread through the freezing kitchen like wildfire. A tech founder who explicitly lies about his collateral is a tech founder who lies about his product. Tristan frantically adjusted the collar of his cashmere sweater, attempting to summon the arrogant charm that had successfully manipulated our parents for 3 decades. He let out a breathless, entirely unconvincing laugh. There is a simple misunderstanding regarding the holding structure of the property, Tristan stammered, stepping toward Caldwell with his palms raised in a desperate, placating gesture. The deed is simply transitioning between shell companies for end-of-year tax purposes. The equity is entirely secure, I absolutely assure you. Caldwell did not blink. His silver hair caught the ambient light of the kitchen as he stared down the sweating 36-year-old man. You explicitly claimed this specific property was unencumbered, Caldwell stated, his tone dripping with absolute ice. You used it to underwrite the bridge loans we floated you last quarter. And now I am holding a foreclosure and eviction notice stating this estate was bought at auction by a third party. Behind this devastating financial confrontation, the Apex culinary team operated with beautiful, almost mocking precision. Marcus, having just delivered the fatal envelope to my father, seamlessly transitioned back into his role as catering director. His team moved like phantoms around the screaming match, sliding silver platters of beluga caviar and miniature beef Wellingtons onto the granite island. They poured perfectly chilled Dom Perignon into crystal flutes, serving the increasingly hostile investors. The juxtaposition was staggering. My family was experiencing absolute financial and social ruin while simultaneously being served a $35,000 five-star feast they could not afford. Marcus caught Caldwell's eye and offered a tray of hors d'oeuvres. Caldwell took one without breaking eye contact with Tristan. 5,000 miles away, I sat cross-legged on my plush hotel bed in Maui, the warm ocean breeze billowing through the open balcony doors. My iPad was propped up against a mountain of pillows, broadcasting the entire spectacular collapse in crisp, high-definition video. I had installed the discreet security cameras in the kitchen molding 3 months ago, originally to protect my expensive baking equipment from Tristan's careless late-night raiding. Now they were providing the greatest entertainment of my entire life. I watched my mother Patricia hyperventilating in the corner, clutching the marble countertop as if it could somehow stop her world from spinning. I watched Thomas staring at his empty hands, finally realizing that the son he had worshipped was nothing but a parasite who had bled him dry. I took a bite of fresh mango and smiled. What my family absolutely did not know, and what Tristan had utterly failed to uncover in his frantic networking, was that Arthur Caldwell and I were not strangers. We had crossed paths 2 years ago when Apex Culinary secured the exclusive hospitality contract for his firm's annual corporate summit in Davos. We had stayed in touch. Caldwell respected self-made, ruthless competence. He utterly despised trust fund brats playing entrepreneur. When Tristan had approached Caldwell's firm for funding, Caldwell had discreetly reached out to me for a character reference. I had told him exactly what my brother was, and Caldwell, a predator in a tailored suit, had decided to play the long game to see just how deep Tristan's fraud actually went. On the iPad screen, Tristan was currently drowning. He was desperately trying to pivot the conversation away from the eviction notice, launching into a frantic pitch about user acquisition metrics and scalable software architecture. His voice pitched higher and higher, echoing off the imported tile. Naya was backing away from him, physically retreating toward the hallway as the investors began pulling out their phones, undoubtedly texting their legal teams to immediately freeze Tristan's corporate accounts. I watched Caldwell take a slow, deliberate sip of his champagne, clearly enjoying the squirming. It was time to deliver the final strike. I picked up my encrypted corporate phone and opened my direct message thread with Arthur Caldwell. My fingers flew across the digital keyboard with practiced ease. I did not need to write a long explanation. I just needed to hand Caldwell the exact weapon required to end Tristan's career permanently. I typed a single devastating sentence. Ask him about the offshore account. I hit send and immediately looked back at the iPad screen. Inside the freezing Connecticut kitchen, a sharp ping echoed from Caldwell's breast pocket. The venture capitalist paused, holding up a single finger to silence Tristan mid-sentence. Tristan snapped his mouth shut, sweating profusely. Caldwell smoothly retrieved his phone, his eyes scanning the glowing screen. A slow, terrifying smile crept across Caldwell's face. It was the smile of a shark that had just cornered a bleeding seal. He slipped the phone back into his tailored jacket and looked up. Tristan swallowed hard, attempting a weak, placating grin. As I was saying, Arthur, the domestic capital is perfectly secured, and we are ready to scale. The domestic capital is irrelevant, Caldwell interrupted, his voice, dropping to a dangerously quiet register that commanded the absolute attention of every single person in the room. Caldwell stepped forward, invading Tristan's personal space. Where is the Cayman Islands money, Tristan? The color completely vanished from Tristan's face. His jaw went slack. The crystal champagne flute slipped from his trembling fingers, shattering violently against the hard tile floor. The sharp crash of crystal against the imported tile broke the spell that had paralyzed the room. Tristan stood over the shattered remains of his champagne flute, his hands trembling violently as Arthur Caldwell simply stared at him. The silence that followed was absolute. Caldwell did not yell. He did not demand an explanation. He simply pulled his tailored coat tighter around his shoulders, signaled to his associates, and walked out the front door. 30 venture capitalists followed him in a synchronized exodus of wealth, leaving Tristan standing in the ruins of his fabricated empire. The heavy mahogany door clicked shut, sealing the Wilsons inside their freezing, foreclosed reality. Nia watched the entire collapse from the edge of the kitchen. For 3 years, she had suspended her own disbelief. She was a brilliant woman who had built a formidable career in corporate communications before meeting Tristan. She had managed crisis accounts for Fortune 500 companies, yet she had allowed Tristan to convince her to step down to manage his personal brand and support his visionary startup. She had traded her corner office for the role of the supportive wife, signing documents she was told not to worry about, and smiling at dinners while Tristan took the credit for her strategic planning. The Cayman Islands, bridge loans, offshore accounts, the buzzwords crashed together in her mind, forming a terrifying, cohesive picture of absolute financial ruin. She stepped over the broken glass, grabbed Tristan by the collar of his ruined cashmere sweater, and dragged him into the adjacent hallway, away from the piercing stares of Clara's catering staff. Tristan. What did you do? Nia demanded, her voice a low, dangerous hiss. Her perfectly manicured fingers dug into his shoulders. Tell me right now what you did with the bridge loans I co-signed. Where is that money? Tristan looked around wildly like a trapped animal. He grabbed her wrists, trying to pry her hands off him. Nia, you need to calm down. He stammered, his voice pitching into a panicked whine. It is just a liquidity issue. The market shifted. I had to move the capital offshore to protect our assets from aggressive taxation. It is a standard tax write-off strategy. Everyone in the valley does it. Do not pitch me, Tristan, Nia snapped, shoving him hard against the expensive floral wallpaper. I am the one who wrote your pitches. You drained my personal accounts. My credit cards are declining. Caldwell just walked out with $5 million because he knows you are a fraud. You used my pristine credit score to fund an offshore account that I have absolutely no access to. Tristan's arrogant facade completely crumbled. His eyes filled with pathetic, desperate tears. He reached out and grabbed her hands, dropping to his knees in the dim hallway. "Nia, please," he begged, his voice cracking. "The SEC is going to look into this. If they trace the bridge loans back to the primary LLC, they will see the discrepancies. I need you to take the fall for the credit card debt, just temporarily. You can say you mismanaged the funds for marketing expenses. It is just a temporary restructuring. I will pay you back the second my crypto portfolio rebounds. I swear it, Nia. I will go to federal prison if you do not sign the liability transfer papers." Nia stared down at the man she had married. The brilliant tech founder she thought she loved was nothing more than a cowardly grifter begging his wife to go to jail for his crimes. A profound, overwhelming disgust washed over her. She pulled her hands out of his grip as if his touch physically burned her. "I am not signing anything, Tristan," she said, her voice completely devoid of emotion. "I am calling my lawyer and I am reporting you for financial fraud." Before Tristan could formulate another pathetic excuse, Patricia marched into the hallway. Patricia had clearly been eavesdropping from the kitchen. Her face was flushed with defensive rage, and she immediately stepped between Nia and her precious golden boy. Patricia glared at Nia with a look of pure, unadulterated contempt. "How dare you speak to my son that way?" Patricia hissed, pointing a trembling finger at Nia's chest. "Tristan has provided you with a lifestyle you could never have achieved on your own. You came into this family with nothing but a communications degree and an inflated ego. You should be grateful a man like Tristan married you. The least you can do is help him when he hits a minor bump in the road. Just sign the papers, Nia. It is your duty as his wife to protect this family." Nia stood frozen, absorbing the full weight of her mother-in-law's words. The casual racism, the aggressive classism, the absolute entitlement. Patricia was demanding she sacrifice her freedom and her future to protect a criminal simply because she believed Nia was lucky to be in their presence. Nia looked past Patricia to Thomas, who was standing near the kitchen entrance. Thomas simply looked away, staring at the floor. He was willing to let Nia go down for his son's crimes too. The entire family was rotten to the core, a unified front of manipulation and deceit. Nia let out a sharp, humorless laugh. She looked Patricia dead in the eyes. "I provided my own lifestyle," Patricia Nia said, her tone razor-sharp. "And I am entirely grateful that this minor bump in the road finally showed me exactly what kind of pathetic racist enablers you really are." Nia turned on her heel and walked straight to the front door. Tristan scrambled up from the floor, yelling her name, begging her to come back, but she did not even break her stride. She grabbed her designer coat from the rack, yanked open the heavy front door, and marched out into the freezing Connecticut night. The icy wind whipped through her hair, but she felt completely numb to the cold. She walked briskly down the snow-dusted driveway toward where her car was parked. She slid into the driver's seat, slamming the door shut to block out the sounds of Tristan screaming from the front porch. She locked the doors, started the engine, and turned the heater on full blast. Her hands were shaking violently as she gripped the leather steering wheel. She had lost her savings, her credit, and her marriage in the span of 30 minutes. She needed a lifeline. She needed someone who understood exactly how ruthless the Wilsons could be. Nia reached into her purse, pulled out her phone, and bypassed her lawyer's contact information. She scrolled straight to Clara's number. She hit dial and put the phone on speaker, listening to it ring, as she stared at the sprawling, dark estate she used to call home. The line clicked open. The faint sound of tropical waves breaking on a shoreline filtered through the car speakers. "Clara," Nia said, her voice trembling but resolute. "I am done. Tell me how to destroy him." 5,000 miles away, Clara reclined on her luxurious Hawaiian sunbed. The Pacific sun was setting, casting a brilliant orange glow across the water. She took a slow sip of her cocktail, a genuine triumphant smile spreading across her face. "Open the glove compartment of his Mercedes," Clara replied, her voice perfectly calm and dangerously sweet. "Look for a blue ledger." Nia ended the call and dropped her phone onto the passenger seat. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She looked through the windshield at the massive detached garage standing at the end of the long, snowy driveway. The structure housed 4 vehicles, including Tristan's prized silver Mercedes AMG. It was his baby, a vehicle he polished obsessively while claiming it projected the necessary aura of a successful tech founder. Now it was going to be his tomb. She slipped out of her car, leaving the engine running and the heater blasting. The freezing Connecticut wind bit through her designer coat, but the adrenaline coursing through her veins masked the cold. She moved swiftly across the snow-dusted concrete, keeping to the shadows. The garage side door was unlocked, a careless habit Tristan had never bothered to break because he believed their gated community was impenetrable. Nia stepped into the cavernous dark space. The air smelled of expensive motor oil and cold concrete. She did not turn on the overhead fluorescent lights. Instead, she relied on the faint moonlight filtering through the frosted windows. She approached the sleek silver Mercedes and pulled the passenger side door handle. It clicked open smoothly. Tristan never locked it when it was parked inside his own garage. She slid into the plush leather seat and popped the glove compartment. The small interior light flickered on, illuminating a stack of vehicle registration papers, expensive sunglasses, and a thick leather-bound owner's manual. Nia dug her hands beneath the clutter, her fingers searching the tight space. Near the very back, wedged tightly against the plastic molding, her hand brushed against something small and hard. She pulled it out. It was a compact blue ledger bound in cheap faux leather. It looked entirely out of place inside a $100,000 luxury vehicle. Nia opened the cover and began turning the pages. What she saw made her stomach churn with a mixture of absolute disgust and profound vindication. Tristan was arrogant, but he was also deeply paranoid. He did not trust digital spreadsheets that could be hacked or subpoenaed during a server raid. He kept his true accounting entirely analog. The pages were filled with his sharp, frantic handwriting detailing the mechanics of a textbook Ponzi scheme. Column A listed the incoming funds from naive early investors. Column B showed those exact funds being immediately wired to pay off the angry initial backers who were demanding their promised returns. There was no product development. There was no revolutionary software architecture. It was just a shell game moving stolen money from one pocket to another. And the final column was the most damning. It listed massive weekly transfers funneled directly into a secret offshore account in the Cayman Islands under a ghost LLC. The exact same offshore account he had used to drain Nia's personal credit lines and hide the equity he stole from his own father. Nia pulled out her smartphone. She turned off the camera flash and silenced the shutter sound. With steady, deliberate movements, she began photographing every single page of the blue ledger. Page 1, click. Page 2, click. She captured the routing numbers, the fake holding company names, and the exact dates he had transferred the stolen funds. She documented every piece of undeniable physical proof. When she reached the final page, she closed the ledger and shoved it back deep into the glove compartment exactly where she had found it. She stepped out of the Mercedes, closed the door quietly, and walked back out into the freezing night. Sitting in the driver's seat of her running car, she selected all 42 high-resolution images, attached them to an encrypted message, and sent them directly to Clara. 5,000 miles away on the warm shores of Maui, Clara's phone chimed with a rapid succession of incoming files. She set down her tropical cocktail and picked up the device. As she swiped through the images of her brother's handwritten financial confessions, a cold, brilliant smile touched her lips. Tristan had essentially written his own prison sentence and signed it in blue ink. Clara did not hesitate for a single second. She opened her secure corporate email client and attached the entire batch of photographs. She addressed the email to the ruthless team of corporate litigators she retained at Apex Holdings. The body of the email contained only 2 sentences. Forward these files to the Securities and Exchange Commission and the FBI White-Collar Crime Division immediately. Ensure they see the offshore routing numbers. She hit send, watching the progress bar shoot across the screen until the files vanished into the ether. The dominoes had officially been tipped. There was no stopping the collapse now. Back in Connecticut, the atmosphere inside the mansion's kitchen had devolved from a war zone into a graveyard. The 30 venture capitalists had vanished, taking their heavy cashmere coats and their millions in funding with them. The elite catering staff from Apex Culinary were silently and efficiently packing up their chafing dishes and induction burners, completely ignoring the ruined family standing amidst the wreckage. Patricia was slumped against the granite island, weeping uncontrollably into her hands. Her perfect makeup was entirely ruined, running in dark streaks down her pale face. Tristan was pacing the length of the kitchen, clutching his hair and muttering frantically to himself about market fluctuations and temporary setbacks. He was completely detached from reality, desperately trying to rebuild his shattered illusion. Thomas stood entirely still near the refrigerator. He looked like a man who had just been diagnosed with a terminal illness. His shoulders were slumped, his eyes hollow and vacant. He had sacrificed his daughter, his integrity, and his entire life savings for a son who was currently hyperventilating over his own incompetence. Suddenly, a sharp, shrill ringing pierced the heavy silence of the kitchen. It was the landline phone mounted on the wall, a device they rarely ever used. The jarring sound echoed off the imported tile, making Patricia flinch. The phone rang a second time, then a third. Tristan stopped pacing, staring at the ringing phone with wide, terrified eyes. Patricia covered her ears. Thomas moved mechanically, his feet dragging across the floor as he approached the wall. He reached out with a trembling hand and pulled the receiver from its cradle. "Hello," Thomas rasped, his voice sounding like dry leaves crushing together. Through the receiver, the sound of distant ocean waves filtered into the freezing Connecticut kitchen. "Dad," Clara said, her voice perfectly calm and devoid of any sympathy. "You have exactly 12 hours to pack your bags. The authorities are coming." The plastic receiver slipped from Thomas's paralyzed hand and slammed against the pristine tile wall. It dangled by its coiled cord, emitting a hollow, continuous dial tone that sounded like a flat line. Thomas turned slowly to face the ruins of his kitchen. His skin was the color of old parchment. "She gave us 12 hours," Thomas whispered into the dead air. "The authorities are on their way." The words dropped like physical anvils into the room. Arthur Caldwell, who had been watching the scene unfold with the detached fascination of a scientist, observing a lab rat, casually buttoned his cashmere overcoat. He stepped over the shattered crystal of Tristan's champagne glass, his expensive leather shoes crunching loudly against the shards. "I am going to dismantle you piece by piece," Tristan Caldwell said, his voice entirely devoid of anger, which made the threat infinitely more terrifying. "By the time my legal team and the federal investigators are finished with you, you will not be able to open a checking account, let alone a technology startup. Do not attempt to contact my firm again." Caldwell did not wait for a response. He signaled to the few remaining investors hovering in the foyer. It was a synchronized, ruthless exodus of wealth. Men and women who controlled billions of dollars grabbed their coats and rushed out the front door, desperate to avoid the blast radius of an active federal fraud investigation. The heavy mahogany door clicked shut, followed immediately by the roar of luxury engines speeding down the snowy driveway. Within minutes, Marcus and his elite catering team followed suit. They moved with terrifying efficiency, silently packing away their silver chafing dishes and portable induction burners. They did not ask for payment. They did not offer sympathy. They simply vanished into the night, leaving the Wilsons entirely alone in a freezing, foreclosed mansion that smelled faintly of expensive truffle oil and abject despair. As the taillights of the catering vans disappeared down the road, the oppressive silence in the kitchen finally shattered. Patricia collapsed onto the cold tile floor, completely uncaring that the puddle of spilled champagne was soaking into the silk of her designer dress. She pulled her knees to her chest and began to wail. It was a shrill, piercing sound born not of remorse, but of pure, unadulterated narcissism. "She planned this," Patricia sobbed, pounding her fists against the granite base of the kitchen island. "Clara planned this to humiliate us. She ruined our perfect Christmas. She has always been bitterly jealous of Tristan. She is a vindictive, hateful girl who wants to destroy this family because she could never measure up to her brother." Thomas stared down at his wife. For 3 decades, he had accommodated her delusions. He had funded her obsession with high society, turned a blind eye to her relentless emotional abuse of their daughter, and allowed her to place Tristan on a pedestal built of lies. The eviction notice burning in his pocket finally incinerated the last shred of his patience. Jealousy. Thomas roared, his voice cracking with a sudden violent fury that made Patricia flinch physically. You think Clara's jealous of a broke, pathetic fraud who just begged his own wife to go to federal prison for him? You drove our daughter away, Patricia. You treated her like a servant in her own home, and you practically stole from her to fund this charade. Patricia scrambled backward, her eyes wide with shock. I never stole anything, she shrieked defensively. I gave everything to this family. Do not sit there and play the victim with me, Thomas yelled, pointing a trembling finger directly at her face. I know exactly what you did 5 years ago. I know you forged Clara's signature on that private loan application just to pay for Tristan's lavish honeymoon in Bora Bora. Tristan, who had been hyperventilating near the sink, suddenly stopped. He looked at his mother, his jaw slack. You ruined her credit before she even launched her business, Thomas continued, his voice echoing brutally through the empty house. I found the documents in your desk last year. You committed financial fraud against your own daughter, and you justified it to yourself by claiming Tristan deserved a proper celebration for marrying well. You are a criminal, Patricia. You built this house of cards, and now it is collapsing on top of us. Patricia opened her mouth to deny it, but no words came out. The ugly, toxic truth was finally exposed under the harsh kitchen lights. The hours that followed were a waking nightmare. As midnight bled into the early hours of the morning, panic completely consumed the household. Tristan locked himself in his father's study, frantically dialing his lawyers, his offshore bankers, and his former board members. Every single call went straight to voicemail. His digital access codes were already bouncing back invalid. The freeze was absolute and immediate. Clara's corporate attorneys had executed the strike with lethal precision. Upstairs, Patricia had descended into complete mania. She dragged 4 massive Louis Vuitton suitcases from the master closet and began violently stuffing them with anything she could grab. She packed silver candlesticks, designer shoes, cashmere blankets, and diamond jewelry, muttering feverishly to herself that they would just go to the Hamptons until Tristan sorted out the misunderstanding. She absolutely refused to accept that the Hamptons house had been leveraged and lost 2 years ago. Thomas did not pack. He sat in the dark, freezing, formal living room, pouring himself a heavy glass of cheap scotch. He stared at the dead embers in the fireplace, listening to the frantic footsteps of his wife upstairs and the muffled, desperate sobbing of his son down the hall. He finally understood that Clara had given them 12 hours not as a courtesy, but as an instrument of psychological torture. She wanted them to sit in the ruins of their arrogance. She wanted them to feel the walls closing in. The agonizing night stretched on, every tick of the grandfather clock sounding like a judge's gavel. Dawn finally broke over the Connecticut hills, painting the snow-covered landscape in a cold, unforgiving shade of gray. It was the morning of Christmas Eve. Thomas finished the last drop of his scotch and stood up, his joints aching and his spirit entirely broken. Through the frosted glass of the bay windows, a new sound disrupted the eerie silence of the morning. It was the heavy synchronized crunch of thick tires rolling over packed snow. Thomas walked slowly to the window and looked out. Turning off the main road and passing through the wrought iron gates of the estate was not a catering van or a venture capitalist's luxury sedan. It was a formidable, terrifying fleet of 6 black, unmarked government SUVs. They pulled into the circular driveway with military precision boxing in Tristan's prized Mercedes and blocking all possible exits. Nia ended the call and dropped her phone onto the passenger seat. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She looked through the windshield at the massive detached garage standing at the end of the long, snowy driveway. The structure housed 4 vehicles, including Tristan's prized silver Mercedes AMG. It was his baby, a vehicle he polished obsessively while claiming it projected the necessary aura of a successful tech founder. Now, it was going to be his tomb. She slipped out of her car, leaving the engine running and the heater blasting. The freezing Connecticut wind bit through her designer coat, but the adrenaline coursing through her veins masked the cold. She moved swiftly across the snow-dusted concrete, keeping to the shadows. The garage side door was unlocked, a careless habit Tristan had never bothered to break because he believed their gated community was impenetrable. Nia stepped into the cavernous dark space. The air smelled of expensive motor oil and cold concrete. She did not turn on the overhead fluorescent lights. Instead, she relied on the faint moonlight filtering through the frosted windows. She approached the sleek silver Mercedes and pulled the passenger side door handle. It clicked open smoothly. Tristan never locked it when it was parked inside his own garage. She slid into the plush leather seat and popped the glove compartment. The small interior light flickered on, illuminating a stack of vehicle registration papers, expensive sunglasses, and a thick leather-bound owner's manual. Nia dug her hands beneath the clutter, her fingers searching the tight space. Near the very back, wedged tightly against the plastic molding, her hand brushed against something small and hard. She pulled it out. It was a compact blue ledger bound in cheap faux leather. It looked entirely out of place inside a $100,000 luxury vehicle. Nia opened the cover and began turning the pages. What she saw made her stomach churn with a mixture of absolute disgust and profound vindication. Tristan was arrogant, but he was also deeply paranoid. He did not trust digital spreadsheets that could be hacked or subpoenaed during a server raid. He kept his true accounting entirely analog. The pages were filled with his sharp, frantic handwriting detailing the mechanics of a textbook Ponzi scheme. Column A listed the incoming funds from naive early investors. Column B showed those exact funds being immediately wired to pay off the angry initial backers who were demanding their promised returns. There was no product development. There was no revolutionary software architecture. It was just a shell game moving stolen money from one pocket to another. And the final column was the most damning. It listed massive weekly transfers funneled directly into a secret offshore account in the Cayman Islands under a ghost LLC. The exact same offshore account he had used to drain Nia's personal credit lines and hide the equity he stole from his own father. Nia pulled out her smartphone. She turned off the camera flash and silenced the shutter sound. With steady, deliberate movements, she began photographing every single page of the blue ledger. Page 1. Click. Page 2. Click. She captured the routing numbers, the fake holding company names, and the exact dates he had transferred the stolen funds. She documented every piece of undeniable physical proof. When she reached the final page, she closed the ledger and shoved it back deep into the glove compartment, exactly where she had found it. She stepped out of the Mercedes, closed the door quietly, and walked back out into the freezing night. Sitting in the driver's seat of her running car, she selected all 42 high-resolution images, attached them to an encrypted message, and sent them directly to Clara. 5,000 miles away on the warm shores of Maui, Clara's phone chimed with a rapid succession of incoming files. She set down her tropical cocktail and picked up the device. As she swiped through the images of her brother's handwritten financial confessions, a cold, brilliant smile touched her lips. Tristan had essentially written his own prison sentence and signed it in blue ink. Clara did not hesitate for a single second. She opened her secure corporate email client and attached the entire batch of photographs. She addressed the email to the ruthless team of corporate litigators she retained at Apex Holdings. The body of the email contained only 2 sentences. Forward these files to the Securities and Exchange Commission and the FBI White-Collar Crime Division immediately. Ensure they see the offshore routing numbers. She hit send, watching the progress bar shoot across the screen until the files vanished into the ether. The dominoes had officially been tipped. There was no stopping the collapse now. Back in Connecticut, the atmosphere inside the mansion's kitchen had devolved from a war zone into a graveyard. The 30 venture capitalists had vanished, taking their heavy cashmere coats and their millions in funding with them. The elite catering staff from Apex Culinary were silently and efficiently packing up their chafing dishes and induction burners, completely ignoring the ruined family standing amidst the wreckage. Patricia was slumped against the granite island, weeping uncontrollably into her hands. Her perfect makeup was entirely ruined, running in dark streaks down her pale face. Tristan was pacing the length of the kitchen, clutching his hair and muttering frantically to himself about market fluctuations and temporary setbacks. He was completely detached from reality, desperately trying to rebuild his shattered illusion. Thomas stood entirely still near the refrigerator. He looked like a man who had just been diagnosed with a terminal illness. His shoulders were slumped, his eyes hollow and vacant. He had sacrificed his daughter, his integrity, and his entire life savings for a son who was currently hyperventilating over his own incompetence. Suddenly, a sharp, shrill ringing pierced the heavy silence of the kitchen. It was the landline phone mounted on the wall, a device they rarely ever used. The jarring sound echoed off the imported tile, making Patricia flinch. The phone rang a second time, then a third. Tristan stopped pacing, staring at the ringing phone with wide, terrified eyes. Patricia covered her ears. Thomas moved mechanically, his feet dragging across the floor as he approached the wall. He reached out with a trembling hand and pulled the receiver from its cradle. "Hello," Thomas rasped, his voice sounding like dry leaves crushing together. Through the receiver, the sound of distant ocean waves filtered into the freezing Connecticut kitchen. "Dad," Clara said, her voice perfectly calm and devoid of any sympathy. "You have exactly 12 hours to pack your bags. The authorities are coming." The tinted window of the silver Maybach glided down with a soft mechanical hum. Tristan lay pinned against the frost-covered grass by two federal agents, his cheek pressed violently into the freezing mud. He twisted his neck, straining to see the luxury vehicle that had just blocked his only escape route. The flashing red and blue lights of the government SUVs reflected off the Maybach's polished exterior, casting eerie shadows across the manicured lawn. The heavy rear door swung open. A pristine white stiletto stepped out onto the snowy driveway, followed by another. Clara emerged into the freezing morning air. She was wearing a flawlessly tailored white power suit that radiated absolute untouchable authority. The crisp, immaculate fabric stood in stark contrast to the muddy, disheveled reality her family was currently wallowing in. For years they had treated her like the hired help, forcing her to wear generic aprons and scrub their baseboards while they flaunted their ill-gotten wealth. Now she looked down at them with the calm, calculating grace of an executioner. Two men stepped out of the Maybach's front doors. They wore sharp charcoal suits and carried thick leather briefcases. They moved with predatory efficiency, flanking Clara immediately to form an impenetrable human shield of legal firepower. Patricia, who had just been threatening to strike a federal agent with her ruined Chanel handbag, suddenly stopped. Her eyes darted from the flashing lights to the lawyers and finally landed on her daughter. The gears in Patricia's frantic, panicked mind violently ground together. She remembered the elite catering staff from the night before. Apex Culinary. Clara was the owner. Clara had money. Patricia shoved past the federal agents, completely ignoring her son's desperate, pathetic pleas from the muddy grass. She slipped on a patch of black ice, but caught her balance, scrambling toward Clara like a feral animal. "Clara, you have to help us!" Patricia screamed, her voice cracking with pure hysteria. "You have money. You own that catering company. Save your brother. Pay them whatever they want." Clara did not flinch. She did not raise her voice. As her mother lunged forward, extending her manicured claws, Clara simply took a smooth, measured step to the side. Patricia stumbled past her, grasping at empty air and barely catching herself on the hood of the Maybach. Clara adjusted the cuffs of her white blazer, keeping her gaze fixed on the woman who had made her life a living hell. "Bail is set at $2 million. Mom," Clara said, her voice dangerously sweet and perfectly level. "Maybe you should sell the house." Patricia whipped around her face, pale and streaked with mascara. Clara held her mother's gaze, letting the freezing silence stretch out over the driveway before delivering the final fatal blow. "Oh, wait, you cannot. It is mine." Patricia froze. The words seemed to bypass her cognitive processing entirely. "What are you talking about?" Patricia gasped, her chest heaving as she gripped the frozen metal of the car. "This is our home." "Not anymore," Clara replied, gesturing to the lawyer standing on her right. My holding company Apex Holdings purchased your defaulted mortgages 3 months ago. You have ignored every single foreclosure notice sent to this address because you thought your precious golden boy was going to bail you out with stolen investor capital. The deed transferred entirely to my name at exactly midnight. You are currently trespassing on my private property. From the grass, Tristan began to thrash against the federal agents. He screamed Clara's name, calling her a traitor, a thief, and a liar. His arrogant facade was completely obliterated, leaving behind nothing but a cowardly grifter realizing his con was finally over. The agents simply hauled him to his feet, effortlessly subduing his frantic movements. They read him his Miranda rights in a bored, monotone voice as they shoved his head down and forced him into the back of a black government SUV. The heavy door slammed shut, severing the golden boy from his fabricated empire forever. Patricia collapsed against the side of the Maybach, hyperventilating. The aggressive entitlement completely drained from her body, replaced by a suffocating, paralyzing terror. She looked to her husband for salvation. Thomas stepped forward. He had watched the entire exchange in stunned, absolute silence. He saw the federal agents processing the scene, securing the perimeter of the estate. He saw the cold, calculated look of triumph in Clara's eyes. He realized instantly that aggression and entitlement would not work here. Clara held every single card. She controlled the narrative, the money, and the property. Thomas took a deep breath, forcibly relaxing his rigid posture. He composed his face into a mask of gentle, paternal concern. He walked slowly toward Clara, holding his empty hands up in a gesture of peaceful surrender. He adopted the soft, warm tone he used to use when she was a little girl, the exact tone he had weaponized for decades to keep her compliant and eager for his approval. "Clara, sweetheart," Thomas said, his voice trembling with manufactured sorrow. "Please, we are family. Family forgives." Clara stared at the man who had spent 30 years teaching her that her only value was in her subservience. She did not blink. She did not soften. The flashing red and blue lights from the federal vehicles cast harsh, rapid shadows across her father's desperate face. He stood there in the freezing snow, trying to weaponize the very concept of family he had spent decades destroying. "Do not call me sweetheart," Clara said, her voice slicing through the freezing morning air like a surgical scalpel. "And do not dare invoke the word family. You lost the right to use that word the day you decided I was nothing more than an indentured servant in your own home." Thomas took a hesitant step back, his hands dropping heavily to his sides. The mask of the benevolent patriarch completely slipped, revealing the terrified old man beneath. "Clara, please," he stammered, abandoning the fatherly warmth for naked pleading. "You are angry. You have every right to be angry. We made mistakes. We were just trying to do what was best for the family legacy." "Mistakes?" Clara repeated, letting out a sharp, humorless laugh that echoed off the stone facade of the mansion. "A mistake is forgetting a birthday, Thomas. What you did was systematic financial abuse. You drained my college fund the morning I turned 18. $30,000 I saved by scrubbing dishes at the local diner, working double shifts while going to high school. You took every single cent to bail out Tristan's first failed startup. You told me it was a mandatory family investment. You told me I was being selfish for wanting an education when my brother was destined to change the world. You looked me dead in the eyes and said a woman's true value was in supporting the men of her household." Patricia let out a muffled sob from her position slumped against the Maybach. She clutched the polished silver door handle as if the expensive vehicle could somehow protect her from the reality of the situation. Clara completely ignored her, keeping her piercing gaze locked entirely on her father. Then came the loans. Clara continued stepping closer, forcing Thomas to retreat another step into the muddy frost. "Patricia forged my signature to fund Tristan's lavish honeymoon in Bora Bora. Do not pretend you did not know. You notarized the secondary documents. You stood right beside her and watched her ruin my credit score before I was even old enough to rent my own apartment. I spent 5 years fighting off aggressive collection agencies because you decided Tristan's luxury vacation was more important than my financial independence. You thought keeping me broke would keep me trapped in your kitchen, cooking your meals and playing the dutiful, quiet daughter forever. Clara, you must understand. Thomas pleaded, his voice cracking as his breath plumed in the freezing air. We were under immense pressure. We were just trying to maintain our position in the community. We thought Tristan would succeed and pay it all back with interest. We thought we were protecting him. You were protecting a parasite, Clara snapped, stepping directly into his personal space. Her crisp white suit practically glowed against the gray morning, a physical manifestation of the power dynamic shifting permanently. You treated me like dirt while you worshipped a cowardly con artist. You constantly belittled my catering business because it required actual physical labor. You called me the help. You made me serve hors d'oeuvres to your country club friends and told them I was just an independent contractor so you would not be embarrassed by my presence. You drained everything from me to feed his insatiable ego. You built this entire pathetic illusion by standing on my back. In the background, the heavy door of a federal SUV slammed shut. Tristan's frantic screaming was finally silenced behind thick bulletproof glass. The federal agents were already taping bright yellow evidence seals over the front doors of the estate, locking the Wilsons out of the life they had stolen. The absolute finality of the heavy doors closing made Thomas flinch violently. He looked toward the black vehicle, realizing his entire legacy was currently sitting in the back of a police transport, wearing a ruined cashmere sweater. Clara tilted her head, studying the broken man before her. She watched the realization wash over him that there was no way out. There were no more lies to spin, no more funds to steal, no more golden boys to protect. Remember when I had pneumonia at 22 and you refused to pay for my medication because Tristan needed new golf clubs for a networking event? Clara asked, her tone dropping to a dangerous, quiet whisper. I was coughing up blood in the guest bathroom because you refused to let me sleep in the main house and risk infecting your precious son. I came to your study and begged you for $80 to pay for my antibiotic prescription. Thomas swallowed hard, his eyes darting wildly toward the ground. He remembered. The shameful memory was carved perfectly into his terrified expression. You told me you did not have the cash, Clara said, her words falling like rhythmic hammer strikes. But 10 minutes later, I watched you write a check for $2,000 to buy Tristan custom titanium clubs. He needed them to impress an angel investor, you said. You looked at me sick and struggling to breathe, and you told me only strong people survive in this world. Clara took one final step forward, closing the distance until she was inches from his face. She stood tall, her posture impeccable, radiating absolute victory. Well, Dad, look who survived. Thomas opened his mouth, but no sound came out. His jaw worked uselessly. He looked at the vast, sprawling estate, the perfectly manicured lawns, the imported stone driveway. Everything he had built was a mirage funded by fraud and stolen from the women he deemed beneath his respect. And now the daughter he had treated like a peasant owned the very ground he was standing on. He was completely dismantled, a hollow shell of a man standing in the freezing snow, about to lose the only thing he truly cared about. The lead attorney standing to Clara's right stepped forward with practiced, seamless precision. He did not introduce himself. He did not offer a polite greeting. He simply pulled a silver pen from his breast pocket and held out a thick leather clipboard. The document attached to the board bore the official embossed seal of Apex Holdings. Sign the final relinquishment of tenancy or you will be arrested for trespassing. Thomas stared at the silver pen in the lawyer's outstretched hand. His fingers trembled violently as he reached for it. The heavy leather clipboard felt like an anvil. He looked at the bold black letters, declaring the immediate relinquishment of the property. There was no negotiation. There was no grace period. Clara had orchestrated a hostile takeover of his entire existence. With a sickening feeling of absolute defeat, Thomas dragged the pen across the dotted line. The ink bled slightly into the thick paper, sealing his ruin. The lead attorney snatched the clipboard back without a single word of acknowledgement. He turned briskly, returning to Clara's side. Thomas let his hand drop to his side, a hollow shell of a patriarch standing in the freezing mud of a driveway he no longer owned. The sharp crunch of boots against packed snow broke the heavy morning silence. Nia emerged from the shadows of the detached garage. She moved with a slow, deliberate cadence, her breath pluming in the frigid air. Her designer coat was pulled tight against the wind, but her posture was rigid and unbothered. She did not spare a single glance for Patricia, who was still weeping against the luxury sedan, or Thomas, who was staring blankly at the ground. Nia's eyes were locked entirely on the black government SUV idling near the estate's wrought iron gates. Inside the back of this police cruiser, Tristan was pressed against the reinforced glass. His face was pale and smeared with mud from his pathetic attempt to escape across the lawn. When he spotted his wife, his eyes widened with a sudden desperate surge of hope. He began pounding his cuffed hands against the window. The federal agent standing guard near the vehicle frowned but reached for the controls, rolling the rear window down a mere 2 inches. It was just enough space to permit a final exchange. Tristan shouted, his voice muffled and frantic. "Thank God you are here. Listen to me carefully. Call the firm. Call my lead defense attorney. Tell them this is a massive misunderstanding. The SEC is overstepping. I need you to liquidate the emergency funds and post my bail. Help me get out of here." He was still playing the victim. Even sitting in the back of a federal transport vehicle facing decades in prison, Tristan firmly believed he was the smartest man in the room. He expected his wife to clean up his mess, just as his parents had done for his entire life. Nia stood perfectly still, letting the freezing wind whip her hair across her face. She did not show a shred of pity. She did not cry. Instead, she reached into her sleek leather tote bag and produced a thick manila folder. She stepped forward and slid the heavy envelope through the narrow 2-inch gap in the window. It landed squarely on Tristan's bound wrists. "What is this?" Tristan stammered, staring down at the paperwork. "It is divorce papers," Nia stated, her voice perfectly steady and ruthlessly precise. "And a confession I just signed for the Federal Bureau of Investigation. It grants me full federal immunity in exchange for handing over your blue ledger." Tristan's breath caught audibly in his throat. The color drained entirely from his face, leaving him looking like a corpse. His eyes darted wildly, taking in the implications of her words. "The ledger," he whispered, his voice trembling. "You went into the garage. You left it shoved in the back of the glove compartment of the Mercedes," Nia replied, a cold, brilliant smile finally touching her lips. "Did you honestly think I would not look? I photographed every single page, Tristan. The ghost accounts, the Cayman Island transfers, the fake investor returns, the money you stole from your own father. The authorities already have everything sitting in their inboxes. I made sure I was the star witness for the prosecution before the sun even came up." Tristan looked as though he had been physically gutted. He slumped back against the hard plastic seat of the cruiser. "You betrayed me," he gasped, his voice cracking with disbelief. "I am your husband." "You are a parasite," Nia corrected sharply, cutting off his self-pity. "You used my personal credit lines. You leveraged our entire future. You sat in that kitchen last night and begged me to go to federal prison for your incompetence. You thought I would just sacrifice myself to protect your fragile ego. Enjoy the fallout, Tristan. I am taking my life back." Nia stepped away from the SUV, turning her back on him completely. She walked back up the driveway and stopped a few feet away from Clara. The two women shared a long, silent look. For years, Patricia and Thomas had pitted them against each other. They had weaponized Clara's status as the scapegoat and Nia's status as the outsider, forcing them into a constant toxic competition for the family's approval. Now, standing in the wreckage of the Wilson Empire, there was no warmth between them, but there was an undeniable, profound mutual respect. They were the only two people who had seen the reality of the situation and acted ruthlessly to survive it. Clara adjusted the cuffs of her immaculate white blazer. She looked at Nia's sharp, calculating demeanor, recognizing the exact brand of survival instinct she possessed herself. "Apex Holdings is expanding rapidly," Clara said, her tone strictly business, cutting through the morning frost. "My company needs a new chief financial officer. I need someone who actually knows how to spot a fraud, and more importantly, someone who is not afraid to burn a sinking ship to the ground to protect her assets. Are you interested?" Nia looked at the foreclosed mansion, then at the weeping parents, and finally back to Clara. A genuine, dangerous smile spread across her face. "I would be honored," Naya replied. "Send me the contract by noon." From the back of the police cruiser, a sudden, violent sound shattered the conversation. Tristan began to thrash uncontrollably against his restraints. The realization that he had lost absolutely everything, his money, his wife, his family, and his freedom, finally destroyed his fragile reality. "You cannot do this to me!" Tristan screamed, his voice tearing raw against the freezing air. He slammed his head against the reinforced glass, his eyes wide and completely unhinged. "I did it all for you, Nia. Everything I stole to give you the life you deserved. I built this empire for us." Clara turned slowly back toward the SUV. She reached into the pocket of her tailored suit and pulled out a small silver flash drive. She held it up between her fingers, letting the flashing red and blue police lights catch its metallic surface. "Did you?" Clara asked, her voice carrying effortlessly over his pathetic screams. "Because this encrypted drive from your offshore accounts says you did it for someone named Amber." Clara did not wait for Tristan to formulate another pathetic excuse from the back of the police cruiser. She lowered the flash drive and pulled her smartphone from her tailored blazer pocket. Her thumb moved with deliberate precision across the glass screen. She tapped a single audio file synced directly from the offshore data cache she had acquired. She turned the speaker volume to maximum and held the device up in the freezing morning air. The silence of the snowy estate was instantly shattered by the arrogant, unmistakable voice of Tristan Caldwell. "Listen to me very carefully." Marcus Tristan's recorded voice sneered through the speaker, dripping with insufferable entitlement. "Amber wants the penthouse suite in South Beach with the wraparound balcony. I do not care if the asking price is $1.5 million. I am wiring the cash directly by the end of the business day." A pause followed in the recording, filled only by the faint sound of ice clinking against a crystal glass. Then Tristan's voice returned, carrying a sickening, arrogant chuckle. "Yes, all of it in cash." The recording continued. "I just liquidated the last of my parents' entire 401k and their primary retirement annuities. The old fools signed the general power of attorney over to me 3 years ago to manage their portfolio. They literally handed me the keys to the vault. Just push the paperwork through. Amber is 22. She is an influencer. She needs the closet space for her brand deals. Just close the damn escrow and send me the deed." Clara pressed the screen, stopping the playback. The silence that slammed back down onto the driveway was heavy enough to crush bone. Inside the black government SUV, Tristan had gone entirely still. His face was pressed against the reinforced window, his eyes wide with absolute paralyzing terror. He looked like a cornered rat who had just realized the trap had snapped completely shut. Patricia let out a sound that barely resembled human noise. It was a guttural, jagged wheeze born of pure psychological agony. The physical shock of the revelation instantly severed the remaining strength in her legs. She slid down the side of the silver Maybach, her knees hitting the icy concrete, with a brutal, audible crack that tore the fabric of her expensive designer slacks. She did not even flinch. Her entire reality had just been atomized. For 30 years she had worshipped Tristan. She had excused his cruelty, funded his extravagance, and actively participated in the emotional destruction of her own daughter just to keep him elevated on a pedestal of absolute perfection. She had genuinely believed that every illegal loan, every forged signature, and every stolen dollar was an investment in her son's brilliant future. Now, the sickening truth ripped through her delusions. Her perfect golden boy had not just stolen from nameless venture capitalists or wealthy strangers. He had deliberately, mercilessly robbed his own parents blind. He had drained their life savings, their security, and their future to purchase a $1 million love nest for a 22-year-old Instagram model. He had let his loyal wife take the agonizing financial risks, and he had let his parents take the fall. "He took everything," Patricia gasped, her voice barely a whisper as she stared blankly at the frost-covered ground. "My retirement, the accounts. He took it all for a child. He left us with nothing." Nia stood a few feet away, her posture rigid and her face hardened into a mask of pure, unadulterated disgust. Less than an hour ago, Tristan had sat in the ruins of the kitchen weeping and begging her to assume liability for his corporate fraud. He had stared into his wife's eyes and demanded she sacrifice her freedom and her reputation, claiming he had done everything to build their marital empire. The sheer depth of his sociopathy was staggering. Nia crossed her arms, the last shred of lingering pity for her husband, instantly turning to ash. She looked at Clara, offering a single definitive nod of solidarity. The team-up was officially cemented in the ashes of Tristan's deceit. Thomas stood near the edge of the driveway, his face the color of wet concrete. He had just signed away the deed to his ancestral home to escape criminal trespassing charges. He had sacrificed his dignity to beg his estranged daughter for mercy. Now he understood that even if Clara had allowed them to stay, they had absolutely nothing left to live on. The money was gone. The legacy was a punchline. His son was a monster. A sudden sharp pain radiated across Thomas's chest. He gasped, clutching the lapel of his heavy winter coat with a trembling fist. His breath hitched, forming ragged white clouds in the freezing air. He stumbled backward, leaning heavily against the brick pillar of the estate gates to keep from collapsing beside his wife. He raised his head, ignoring the burning tightness in his chest, and looked directly at the police cruiser. He did not look at Tristan with sorrow or parental disappointment. He looked at the golden boy with pure, unadulterated revulsion. It was the look of a man who realized he had spent his entire life nurturing a venomous snake, only to be fatally bitten when he had nothing left to offer. The lead federal agent standing near the SUV keyed his radio, giving a sharp, concise command to the driver. The time for theatrics was over. The engine of the heavy black vehicle roared to life, shattering the quiet morning. The tires spun briefly against the packed snow before finding traction. Slowly, the cruiser pulled away from the circular driveway. Through the tinted back window, Tristan's silhouette remained pressed against the glass, a desperate, pathetic figure watching his stolen empire recede into the distance. The flashing red and blue lights painted the snow-covered trees as the convoy of government vehicles accelerated down the winding road. They carried the golden boy away from the gated community, away from the luxury and the lies, straight toward a federal lockup where neither his charm nor his stolen wealth could save him. The taillights of the federal convoy vanished into the gray morning mist, taking the last remnants of the Wilson family's fabricated prestige with them. The heavy wrought iron gates of the estate clicked shut with a sharp metallic finality that echoed across the snow-covered grounds. Clara did not watch the vehicles disappear. She had already mentally discarded her brother the moment the cruiser doors locked. She pivoted on her pristine white stilettos, turning her attention back to the driveway. Thomas and Patricia stood exactly where Tristan had left them. They looked small, fragile, and utterly pathetic. The biting Connecticut wind whipped through the driveway, tearing at their thin, expensive clothing. Patricia was still trembling on the icy concrete, her designer slacks soaked with freezing mud. Thomas stood hunched near the stone pillar, his arms wrapped tightly around his own chest, trying to conserve whatever body heat he had left. The realization that their golden boy had financially gutted them to fund a 22-year-old Instagram model's luxury lifestyle was still radiating through their shattered minds. Clara pulled back the immaculate white cuff of her blazer and glanced at her watch. "It is currently 7:15 in the morning," Clara announced, her voice cutting through the howling wind with absolute authority. "I have a return flight to Maui at noon, and I have absolutely no intention of missing it. You have precisely 1 hour to pack your personal clothes and vacate my property." Thomas blinked rapidly, his frostbitten face contorting in confusion. "Clara, you cannot be serious," he stammered, his teeth audibly chattering. 1 hour. We have lived here for 30 years. You cannot expect us to pack up an entire lifetime in 60 minutes. "I am being exceedingly generous, Thomas," Clara replied, her tone completely devoid of warmth. "Had I allowed the bank to execute the default normally, they would have sent armed county sheriffs to physically drag you out of your beds and throw your belongings into the street. I am giving you a 60-minute head start to pack your suitcases with dignity. I highly suggest you stop arguing and start walking." The harsh reality of the ticking clock finally pierced through Patricia's shock-induced stupor. The survival instinct of a desperate socialite violently kicked in. She scrambled up from the icy pavement, ignoring the mud staining her clothes and the stinging pain in her bruised knees. Her mind instantly bypassed the fact that she was homeless and fixated entirely on the preservation of her material status. "We need the silver," Patricia muttered feverishly, her eyes darting wildly toward the massive mahogany front doors, the heirloom silver in the dining room, and the Chagall painting in the foyer. "We can sell the artwork. We can take the Persian rugs. I have to get the safe in the master bedroom." She lunged forward, pushing past Thomas and sprinting up the icy stone steps toward the entrance of the mansion. She reached for the heavy brass handle, her mind already cataloging which priceless artifacts she could stuff into the back of her car to maintain the illusion of wealth. Before her fingers could even graze the metal, two massive men in tactical black suits stepped seamlessly out of the shadows of the portico. They were Clara's private security detail professionals who moved with terrifying synchronized speed. They stepped directly in front of the mahogany doors, forming an impenetrable human wall. "Move out of my way," Patricia shrieked, raising her fist to strike the guard on the left. "This is my house. I demand you step aside." The security contractor did not flinch. He simply crossed his arms over his chest and stared down at her with a blank, intimidating gaze. Clara walked slowly up the stone steps, stopping just behind her frantic mother. "Ah," Clara said, clicking her tongue in a mocking reprimand. "Personal clothes only, Mom." Patricia whipped around her chest, heaving. "What are you talking about?" she demanded, her voice shrill and panicked. "Those are my things. That is my artwork. My silver. You cannot stop me from taking what belongs to me." "Nothing in this house belongs to you," Clara replied, her voice dropping to a dangerously calm pitch. "When Tristan drained your retirement accounts and stopped paying the mortgage, the bank initiated a total asset seizure. You signed a general power of attorney, handing Tristan complete control over your estate. When he defaulted, the bank claimed the house and everything inside it to cover the massive deficit." Clara took a step closer, forcing Patricia to back up against the impenetrable wall of security guards. "When Apex Holdings purchased your debt portfolio from the bank, we purchased the entire property as is," Clara explained, articulating every single word so the reality would permanently brand itself into her mother's brain. The Chagall painting in the foyer, the heirloom silver in the dining room, the Persian rugs you are so desperately trying to steal. All of it was included in the foreclosure sale. That belongs to me now. If you attempt to remove a single piece of furniture or a single piece of artwork from this estate, I will have you arrested for grand larceny before you even reach the highway." Patricia's mouth opened and closed silently. Her eyes darted frantically around the grand portico, searching for a loophole, a lie, or an escape hatch that no longer existed. "You are a monster," Patricia hissed, venom dripping from her words. "You are enjoying this. You planned this just to destroy us." "I did not force Tristan to steal your retirement," Clara shot back, completely unfazed by the insult. "I did not force him to buy a penthouse for his mistress. I did not force you to sign away your financial independence to a narcissist. You built the monster, Mom. I am just the woman who bought the cage you locked yourselves in. Your hour is ticking. I suggest you go find a suitcase." Patricia let out a guttural sob of absolute defeat. She pushed past Clara and stumbled into the house, her manicured hands shaking violently as the security guard stepped aside just enough to let her pass. At the bottom of the steps, Thomas remained entirely frozen. The cold had seeped deep into his bones, but it was nothing compared to the freezing terror gripping his heart. He looked up at the towering mansion that had defined his success for 3 decades. He had no money. He had no credit. His son was in federal custody, and his wife was currently packing sweaters into a duffel bag. He took a slow, agonizing step forward. His shoulders slumped, and his eyes filled with terrified, desperate tears. He looked at Clara, the daughter he had thrown away, standing victorious on the steps of the kingdom he had lost. "Clara, please." Thomas begged, his voice cracking into a pathetic whimper as he wrapped his arms around himself. "The banks are frozen. My credit cards are bouncing. We have no cash. Where will we go? It is Christmas Eve. Clara stared at the tears freezing on her father's wrinkled cheeks. He was utilizing the holiday attempting to weaponize the very concept of Christmas charity as a final desperate shield. It was the ultimate hypocrisy from a man who had never shown her an ounce of grace. Christmas Eve. Clara repeated the words brittle and sharp in the freezing air. Do you remember where I was last Christmas Eve, Thomas? I was in the industrial kitchen of this exact house. I worked a 19-hour shift catering your annual holiday gala because your regular chef quit, and you refused to pay for a premium replacement. You told your country club friends I was just a hired hand from a local vendor. You made me use the service entrance so my presence would not ruin the aesthetic of your party. Thomas squeezed his eyes shut, unable to meet her piercing gaze. He shrank into his heavy wool coat, the reality of his past cruelty, finally catching up to him with devastating force. Clara reached into the pocket of her pristine white blazer. Her fingers brushed against a piece of paper she had been carrying for exactly 3 weeks. She pulled it out and held it up. It was a single crumpled $100 bill. Tristan threw this at me last month, Clara said, her voice dropping to a low, lethal register. He tossed it onto the floor of my catering van. He told me to buy myself a decent outfit so I would not look like a peasant and embarrass the family name. I kept it. She stepped forward and shoved the crumpled bill directly against Thomas's chest. His trembling, freezing fingers reflexively closed around the paper. Take an Uber, Clara commanded. I hear there is a Motel 6 down the highway that takes walk-ins. Your 60 minutes starts right now. She turned her back on him, signaling to the lead security contractor with a slight nod. The towering men in tactical suits immediately flanked Thomas, herding the broken patriarch up the stone steps and into the mansion to supervise the exodus. The next hour was a masterclass in psychological dismantling. Clara remained standing on the grand portico, her breath forming steady, rhythmic clouds in the frigid morning air. She did not go inside to gloat. She did not need to. The sounds echoing from the open doorway told the entire story. There were frantic, panicked whispers, the heavy thud of footsteps rushing across hardwood floors, the sharp, authoritative voices of Clara's security team enforcing the strict parameters of the eviction. Patricia attempted to sneak her diamond tennis bracelets and a velvet pouch of emerald earrings into her makeup bag. The guards confiscated them, immediately dumping the glittering jewels onto the foyer table like cheap trinkets. They forced her to leave her fur coats and designer handbags behind, citing the legal parameters of the foreclosure asset seizure. She was allowed to take basic sweaters, heavy pants, and practical winter boots. Exactly 58 minutes later, they emerged. Thomas and Patricia walked out of the heavy mahogany doors for the absolute last time. They were stripped of their luxury brands and their unearned arrogance. Patricia was wearing a plain gray wool coat, her mascara smeared in dark, chaotic streaks down her pale cheeks. Thomas wore a faded fleece jacket, his shoulders hunched so deeply he looked a decade older than he had an hour ago. Behind them, they dragged 2 cheap canvas suitcases. The luggage had been pulled from the basement storage, a forgotten relic from years past. Clara stood at the top of the stairs, looking down at the people who had made her life a living hell. She did not offer a parting word. She did not gloat or scream. She simply watched them descend the icy stone steps. The wheels of the cheap canvas suitcases hit the concrete driveway with a loud, grating scrape. Because Clara had seized the vehicles as part of the corporate takeover, they had no luxury sedan waiting to whisk them away. Because they had no credit, they could not summon a private car service. They had to walk. Clara watched her parents turn away from the mansion and begin the long, grueling trek down the winding quarter-mile driveway. The snow was falling heavier now, coating the imported stone path in a thick layer of white frost. The plastic wheels of their luggage caught and jammed on the ice, forcing Thomas to jerk and yank the bags forward with agonizing effort. There was no yelling. There was no screaming. Patricia did not turn around to hurl one final curse. Thomas did not look back to beg for a second chance. There was only the eerie, deafening silence of absolute, total defeat. The only sound was the harsh scraping of plastic wheels against the frozen ground and the howling winter wind. Clara stood completely still until their hunched, shivering silhouettes were swallowed entirely by the morning mist at the end of the estate gates. They were gone. The toxic hierarchy that had suffocated her for 3 decades was permanently dismantled. She turned around and walked into the grand foyer. The security contractors were waiting silently by the perimeter. Clara stepped over the threshold and firmly grasped the heavy brass handles of the mahogany doors. She pulled them shut. The deadbolt engaged with a heavy metallic clack that echoed like a gunshot through the cavernous entrance hall. The house was completely silent. It was empty. It was warm, and it belonged entirely to her. Clara let out a slow, measured breath. She untied the belt of her white coat and walked past the priceless Chagall painting hanging in the hallway. She did not spare it a glance. She moved with steady purpose through the massive formal dining room and stepped directly into Thomas's private study. The room still smelled faintly of his expensive cigars and old leather, but the oppressive energy he had always cast over the space was completely eradicated. She walked straight to the custom climate-controlled wine refrigerator built into the mahogany bookshelves. She bypassed the standard bottles and reached for the top shelf. Her fingers wrapped around the neck of a 1982 vintage Bordeaux. It was the exact bottle Thomas had proudly displayed for years, loudly proclaiming to his country club friends that he was saving it for the day Tristan made his first billion. Clara pulled the bottle out. She retrieved a silver corkscrew from the wet bar and removed the cork with practiced, effortless precision. The rich, complex aroma of the aged wine filled the air. She reached for a crystal goblet and poured the dark ruby liquid, watching it catch the morning light filtering through the study windows. She set the bottle down on Thomas's pristine leather desk. Clara picked up the crystal glass, holding it by the delicate stem. She looked around the silent, empty mansion that she had won not through luck or favor, but through sheer, unrelenting brilliance. She raised the glass to the empty room, offering a toast to her own survival, and took a slow, victorious sip. Exactly 2 weeks passed since the heavy mahogany door clicked shut, sealing the fate of the Wilson family. Clara sat behind a massive slab of polished black marble in her corner office on the 42nd floor of the Apex Holdings corporate tower. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a commanding panoramic view of the bustling city below. The sleek, minimalist aesthetic of the room reflected the woman she had become, sharp, immaculate, and entirely unyielding. She took a sip of her black coffee, her eyes scanning a digital quarterly report on her monitor. Her executive assistant knocked twice before stepping into the room, placing a single piece of mail on the edge of the marble desk. The envelope stood out immediately against the pristine corporate environment. It was cheap, thin paper, bearing the printed logo of a discount highway motel. The address was written in a shaky, desperate scrawl. Clara picked it up. She did not need a return address to know who sent it. She slid a silver letter opener through the top and unfolded the lined notebook paper inside. The handwriting belonged to Patricia, but the arrogant, elegant calligraphy her mother had spent years perfecting was completely gone. Instead, the letters were jagged and erratic, the physical manifestation of a woman whose reality had collapsed. My darling Clara. The letter began relying on a maternal warmth that had never actually existed. I am begging you to reconsider. Thomas is not well. The stress of the motel, the awful food, the terrible noise, it is aggravating his heart condition. We have absolutely nothing left. Tristan's defense attorneys require a $500,000 retainer just to look at his case, and his bail was denied. We are his parents. We have to help him, but we cannot even afford a decent meal. Please, Clara. You have made your point. You have proven you are successful. Now please find it in your heart to forgive us. We are your family. We need our daughter. Clara stared at the cheap blue ink. She read the words twice, absorbing the sheer staggering magnitude of Patricia's delusion. Even now, living in a roadside motel wearing the same clothes for 14 days, Patricia was still trying to secure funds for Tristan. She was still trying to weaponize Clara's empathy to save the golden boy who had bankrupted them. A profound, icy calmness washed over Clara. The letter triggered a memory, pulling her violently back to a freezing night exactly 10 years ago. She remembered standing on the wraparound porch of the estate, the icy rain soaking through her thin cotton jacket. She was 18 years old. Two heavy black trash bags containing every piece of clothing she owned sat in puddles of muddy water at her feet. Patricia had stood safely inside the dry, warm foyer, holding a crystal glass of expensive Chardonnay. She looked at Clara not with the protective instincts of a mother, but with the cold calculation of an accountant auditing a failing asset. "You are a financial drain on this household, Clara." Patricia had said, her voice perfectly steady over the sound of the pouring rain. "Tristan's startup requires our full financial backing. We cannot afford to subsidize your pointless catering hobbies or pay for your community college courses. Besides, Tristan needs your bedroom to serve as his home office. You are an adult now. Figure it out." Patricia had reached forward and closed the door. The deadbolt slid into place with a heavy metallic click. Clara had stood on that porch shivering violently with exactly $30 in her checking account and nowhere to go. She had dragged those trash bags 3 miles in the freezing rain to a 24-hour diner where she begged the manager for a night shift just to stay warm. Patricia had not called the next day. She had not called the next week. She had slept soundly in her mansion while her daughter scrubbed grease off diner griddles to survive. Clara snapped back to the present, her eyes focusing on the pathetic handwritten plea resting on her marble desk. She reached into her blazer pocket and pulled out a sleek, matte black butane lighter. She flicked it open, the bright blue flame hissing to life in the quiet office. She held the corner of Patricia's letter to the fire. The cheap paper caught instantly. The flames ate through the words, "My darling Clara," turning the fake maternal affection into curling black ash. Clara held the paper until the fire crept perilously close to her manicured fingers before dropping it into a heavy crystal ashtray on her desk. She watched the smoke rise toward the ceiling. She searched her heart for a shred of guilt, a sliver of remorse, or even a brief pang of daughterly obligation. There was nothing. The fire burned away the last invisible chain tethering her to the Wilson name. The ashes in the crystal bowl were the final physical representation of their relationship. The frosted glass door of her office swung open. Her assistant stepped inside, holding a pristine manila folder bearing the official seal of the City Planning Commission. "The permits are approved, Ms. Williams," her assistant said, placing the folder next to the smoldering ashtray. "The zoning board cleared the demolition request this morning. The environmental safety checks are complete, and the crews have been dispatched." Clara looked down at the approved permits. A slow, genuine smile spread across her face. "Excellent," Clara replied, standing up from her desk and grabbing her tailored overcoat. "Cancel my afternoon meetings. I have to go oversee a project." An hour later, Clara's sleek black town car turned off the main highway and drove through the affluent Connecticut suburb. She pulled up to the familiar wrought iron gates of the estate. The gates swung open automatically, recognizing her secure access code. She drove up the quarter-mile driveway, but the pristine quiet of the neighborhood was entirely gone. The sprawling, perfectly manicured front lawn was no longer an immaculate carpet of green. The pristine landscaping Patricia had obsessed over for 3 decades was completely destroyed. Parked across the frozen grass were 6 massive pieces of industrial heavy machinery. Bright yellow excavators, idle bulldozers, and a towering crane equipped with a heavy wrecking ball sat directly in front of the grand portico. A team of demolition contractors in hard hats and high-visibility vests were actively drilling safety barricades into the frozen earth surrounding the mansion. Clara stepped out of her car, pulling her coat tight against the wind. She looked up at the towering brick facade, the grand columns, and the imported slate roof. Thomas and Patricia had spent their entire lives treating this house as a monument to their superiority. They had believed the physical structure elevated them above the rest of the world. Clara was not going to live in their monument. She was going to erase it from the face of the earth. The flickering fluorescent bulb of the motel bathroom buzzed with a relentless grating hum that seemed to drill directly into Thomas's skull. He sat on the edge of a sagging mattress, stained with questionable brown rings, staring blankly at the peeling yellow wallpaper. The room smelled permanently of stale cigarette smoke and cheap bleach. A neon sign flashed outside their single window, casting harsh red shadows across his deeply lined face. Patricia sat at a wobbly particle board table, nursing a cup of instant coffee she had made using hot tap water. She was wrapped in the plain gray wool coat she had worn every single day for the past 2 weeks. The manicured socialite who once dictated the rules of high society was completely gone, replaced by a hollow, shivering shell of a woman. The silence in the cramped room was suffocating. Thomas reached for the sticky plastic television remote resting on the nightstand. He clicked the power button, hoping the mindless drone of daytime television would drown out the pounding reality of his complete financial ruin. The ancient box television flared to life with a crackle of static. The local Channel 8 morning news broadcast filled the small screen. Thomas did not immediately register what he was seeing. The aerial drone footage showed a sprawling property covered in a blanket of pristine white snow. The camera panned down, revealing a grand brick facade, tall colonial columns, and an imported slate roof. It was a property Thomas knew better than the back of his own hand. It was the Wilson estate. Patricia dropped her styrofoam cup. The lukewarm coffee spilled across the cheap table and dripped onto the filthy carpet, but she did not move. Her eyes were locked onto the television screen, wide, with unadulterated horror. A bright yellow excavator ripped its massive steel claw directly through the grand portico. Thomas gasped a sharp, breathless sound as if the machine had struck his own chest. The television volume blared as the local news anchor spoke over the deafening sound of crunching brick and shattering glass. Breaking news this morning out of Fairfield County, where a historic luxury estate is currently being leveled to the ground. The sprawling property formerly owned by the recently disgraced Wilson family was acquired in a private corporate buyout last month. The new owner initiated the demolition at dawn today. The camera cut to ground level. A towering crane swung a heavy wrecking ball backward before releasing it with terrifying momentum. The steel ball smashed directly into the master suite, tearing through the walls and sending a massive plume of gray dust into the winter air. The mahogany doors that Clara had locked just 2 weeks prior were crushed under the treads of a bulldozer, splintering into unrecognizable kindling. "Stop!" Thomas whispered, his hands shaking violently as he clutched the remote. "Stop it!" But the screen offered no mercy. The broadcast cut to a live press conference staged safely behind the temporary barricades. Clara stood at the podium. She looked immaculate. She wore a tailored black trench coat over a stark white turtleneck, projecting an aura of absolute, untouchable power. The chaotic dust and debris rising behind her served only to highlight her perfect composure. She commanded the space with a calm, terrifying authority that Thomas had never possessed. "Ms. Williams," a reporter shouted, holding a microphone forward. "The property is valued at nearly $10 million. Tearing it down seems like a massive financial loss. What exactly are your plans for this prime real estate?" Clara adjusted the microphone. Her voice cut through the television speakers, crystal clear and dangerously sharp. "I did not buy this property for the real estate value," Clara announced, staring out at the sea of reporters. "I bought it for the cleansing process." Patricia let out a guttural sob, burying her face in her hands. For 3 decades, this land housed nothing but vanity, arrogance, and financial exploitation. Clara continued her words, driving like nails into the coffin of her parents' legacy. It was a monument built on the backs of exploited workers and sustained by fraudulent wealth. "I am erasing it from the map. As of this morning, I have officially transferred the deed to the entire 4-acre estate to a nonprofit trust." The reporters frantically scribbled in their notepads. "We are breaking ground next month on a state-of-the-art facility," Clara explained smoothly. "It will serve as a comprehensive shelter and professional training center for victims of domestic and financial abuse. Women who have been controlled, manipulated, and stripped of their resources will have a place to rebuild their lives and reclaim their financial independence. We are turning a symbol of toxic entitlement into a foundation of genuine empowerment." In the dingy motel room, Thomas slid off the edge of the mattress and collapsed onto his knees. The rough carpet scraped against his skin, but he could not feel it. He stared at the television, completely paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of his destruction. His company was gone. His golden son Tristan was sitting in a federal holding cell facing decades in prison. His bank accounts were seized, and now the ultimate symbol of his pride, the mansion he had used to exert dominance over everyone in his life, was literally turning to dust before his eyes. He had no legacy left. Clara had not just taken his money, she had fundamentally rewritten history. His name would no longer be associated with wealth or success. It would be associated with a shelter built over the ruins of his failures. The daughter he had starved, abused, and thrown into the street had entirely deleted his existence from the world. He wrapped his arms around his chest and wept. On the television screen, a reporter called out one final question. "Ms. Williams, do you have any message for the previous owners who lost this estate due to their financial crimes?" Clara stopped. The chaotic sounds of the demolition roared in the background. A bulldozer pushed a massive pile of shattered bricks into a dumpster, permanently clearing the space where the grand dining room used to be. She slowly turned her head. She looked directly into the camera lens, bridging the physical distance through the broadcast. She knew exactly where Thomas and Patricia were. She knew exactly what they were watching. Her lips curved into a sharp, knowing smile. A smile devoid of warmth, but entirely full of absolute victory. She did not say a single word. She just held that piercing, victorious gaze through the lens, letting the silence and the sound of falling bricks speak for her. The screen faded to a commercial leaving. Thomas kneeling in the dark, accompanied only by the buzzing neon sign and the realization that he was officially a ghost. 6 months later, the deafening roar of the demolition site had been entirely replaced by the melodic clinking of crystal glasses and the hushed murmurs of the city elite. The midday sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Le Bernardin, illuminating the pristine white tablecloths and the flawless silver cutlery. Clara sat in a private corner booth, projecting an aura of absolute untouchable power. She wore a tailored midnight blue suit that commanded attention without demanding it. Across from her sat Nia. Nia looked completely transformed from the woman she used to be. Gone were the pastel designer dresses and the heavy performative makeup Tristan had always demanded she wear to corporate galas. Today Nia wore a sharp emerald blazer, her hair pulled back into a sleek, practical style. She radiated a quiet, formidable intelligence that had always been there, just buried under the suffocating weight of the Wilson family expectations. Nia took a delicate sip of her sparkling water before setting the crystal glass down on the immaculate table. The final sentencing came through this morning. Nia announced her tone strictly professional, but carrying an undeniable edge of deep satisfaction. 8 years in federal prison. He pleaded guilty to all counts of wire fraud and embezzlement to avoid a longer trial. There will be no possibility of early parole. Clara did not smile. She simply nodded, taking the news with the cold calculation of a business acquisition closing. Tristan always believed he was the smartest person in any room, Clara replied smoothly, slicing a small piece of perfectly seared halibut. His arrogance was his primary liability. He truly thought the federal investigators would be as easily manipulated as our parents. Nia let out a short, sharp laugh that caught the attention of a nearby waiter. Speaking of manipulation, Amber did not even wait for the judge to strike the gavel, Nia said, leaning forward slightly. The absolute second the federal agents froze Tristan's offshore accounts, she packed her designer bags and vanished. I heard through mutual acquaintances in the city that she left him a brief text message before boarding a flight. She is currently vacationing in Dubai with a real estate developer twice his age. Tristan practically bankrupted his entire family to buy her loyalty, and she bolted before his trial even began. A completely predictable return on investment, Clara noted, wiping her mouth with a linen napkin. Tristan purchased an illusion. Illusions shatter the absolute moment the funding dries up. He bought loyalty with stolen money and was shocked when it expired. The conversation shifted naturally, seamlessly, transitioning from the ruins of their shared past to the bizarre reality of the present. The waiter arrived to clear their plates, replacing them with 2 small cups of artisanal espresso. "Have you driven past the old neighborhood lately?" Nia asked, stirring a small sugar cube into her cup. I have absolutely no reason to return there, Clara stated, her voice dangerously calm. The foundation for the shelter is already poured. The construction crew sends me weekly progress reports detailing the framing and electrical work. That is the only update I require. Well, I had to drive up to Connecticut last week to finalize the sale of the remaining assets from the divorce settlement. Nia said, a slow, disbelieving smile spreading across her face. I stopped at a local diner off the interstate to grab a coffee before the drive back. You will never guess who took my order. Clara raised an eyebrow, mildly intrigued by the sudden shift in Nia's energy. Patricia Nia revealed, her eyes shining with the poetic justice of the situation. She was wearing a brown polyester uniform and a plastic name tag. She is working the cash register, ringing up truck drivers and local construction workers. When she saw me walk in, she actually dropped a stack of laminated menus on the floor. She turned completely pale and tried to hide in the back kitchen, but the shift manager yelled at her to get back to the front counter and wipe down the sticky tables. Clara stopped moving. She pictured her mother, the woman who had spent decades organizing high-society charity galas just to flaunt her wealth, forced to stand on her feet for 8 hours a day, serving the very working-class people she had relentlessly mocked. Patricia had once thrown Clara out into the freezing rain for choosing to work in a commercial kitchen. She had called Clara a peasant for catering to survive. The absolute irony of her mother currently smelling like stale grease and cheap diner coffee was perfection. And Thomas, Clara asked. He is working as a greeter at the regional hardware store 2 towns over, Nia said, shaking her head in sheer disbelief. He wears a bright orange vest and hands out shopping carts to customers as they walk through the sliding glass doors. He looked completely defeated, Clara. The bank seized everything they had hidden away to cover Tristan's mounting legal fees. They are living paycheck to paycheck in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment above a noisy laundromat. They built their own cage, Clara replied, staring coldly into her espresso. I simply locked the door. Nia nodded in total agreement. The heavy shadows that used to haunt her eyes during her marriage were entirely gone. She looked across the table at Clara with profound, genuine gratitude. The toxic hierarchy that had controlled both of their lives had been permanently dismantled, and they were the ones standing victorious in the aftermath. I want to thank you, Clara, Nia said, her voice softening just a fraction. When you offered me the chief financial officer position at Apex Holdings, I thought you were making a pity hire. I thought you were just trying to twist the knife into Tristan by employing his ex-wife. But these past 6 months have been the most fulfilling of my entire life. I do not make pity hires, Clara stated firmly, her gaze locking onto Nia. I read the financial portfolios you secretly managed, while Tristan was out playing executive. You single-handedly kept his divisions afloat for 3 years, with your market projections. You are a brilliant financial strategist, Nia. The fact that the Wilson family only valued you as a quiet trophy wife to stand silently beside him in photographs was their greatest strategic failure. I hired you because you are a lethal asset. It is incredibly liberating, Nia admitted, her posture straightening with quiet, fierce pride. To wake up every morning and be respected entirely for my brain. To sit in a corporate boardroom and have my financial projections treated as absolute law. I spent 10 years making myself small so Tristan could feel big. I will never shrink myself for a man or a family ever again. You will never have to, Clara assured her, raising her crystal water glass. To the new matriarchy. To the new matriarchy, Nia echoed, clinking her glass against Clara's. The waiter approached their table silently, placing a sleek black leather billfold discreetly near the center of the table. Clara immediately reached forward, her fingers brushing the dark leather to settle the expensive tab. Before she could pull it toward her, Nia's hand shot out, intercepting the motion. Nia opened the leather flap and smoothly dropped a heavy black titanium corporate card directly onto the receipt. I have got this, Nia said, her lips curving into a sharp, brilliant smile. The company is doing exceptionally great. Warm white sand shifted beneath Clara's bare feet. The relentless howling wind of the Connecticut winter was a lifetime away, entirely replaced by the gentle rhythmic crashing of the Pacific Ocean. The intense Hawaiian sun beat down on her shoulders, melting away the last microscopic layers of corporate tension she had carried across the country. She wore a simple, flowing linen sundress, her phone clutched loosely in one hand, and a woven beach bag slung over her shoulder. For the first time in 31 years, she was exactly where she wanted to be on a vacation that absolutely no one could interrupt. Clara stopped walking and let the warm, salt water wash over her ankles. She looked out at the endless expanse of turquoise water, her mind drifting to the ruins she had left behind on the East Coast. The Wilson family name, once a towering monolith of suburban prestige, had been completely reduced to dust and scattered across the regional news cycle. The heavy machinery had leveled the estate. The bank had seized the remaining assets. The toxic hierarchy was permanently dead. Society constantly preaches a very specific, unbreakable narrative about family. People will tell you that blood is thicker than water. They will insist that you only get one mother, one father, and one sibling, and that shared DNA is a lifelong contract of unconditional forgiveness. Clara stared at the horizon, firmly rejecting that premise. Blood did not mean loyalty. A biological coincidence did not grant anyone an infinite license for chronic psychological and financial abuse. Her parents had wielded the word family like a weapon, using it to demand compliance, silence, and absolute servitude. They had demanded her loyalty while simultaneously starving her of basic affection. Clara realized her true family was not the people who shared her last name. Her family was the empire she had built from the ground up with her own blood, sweat, and sheer brilliance. Her family consisted of people like Nia, a woman who had survived the exact same manipulative nightmare and emerged as a fiercely loyal, brilliant partner. Her true family was the profound, untouchable peace she had fought a brutal war to secure. A sharp vibration in her hand broke through the serene sound of the ocean waves. Clara glanced at the screen of her phone. It was an unknown number, originating from out of state. Normally, she would send an unsolicited call directly to voicemail, but her mind immediately went to the construction supervisors breaking ground on the new domestic abuse shelter. She swiped the green icon and lifted the phone to her ear. "You have a collect call from an inmate at a federal penitentiary. Press 1 to accept the charges." A slow, dangerous smile curved across Clara's lips. She pressed the number 1 on her keypad and waited. "Clara." Tristan's voice came through the receiver. He was entirely unrecognizable. The arrogant, booming swagger of the golden boy who used to order expensive champagne on his parents' credit cards was completely eradicated. His voice was thin, reedy, and shaking with unmistakable desperation. "Please do not hang up. I know you hate me, I know I deserve it, but I have absolutely no one else to call." Clara remained completely silent, letting the gentle ocean breeze blow through her hair as she listened to the sound of her brother breaking down. The silence seemed to push Tristan into a full-blown panic. "I have nothing, Clara," he sobbed directly into the receiver, the sound pathetic and hollow. "Amber blocked my number the absolute second the feds froze my accounts. Mom and Dad cannot even afford to put gas in their car, let alone help me. The public defender they assigned me was useless. The food in here is rotting. I have absolutely no money in my commissary account. I cannot buy soap. I cannot buy extra food. I cannot even buy decent socks. I am begging you. You have so much money now. You bought the company. You bought the house. Just wire a few $100s to my commissary account. Please, Clara. I am your brother." Clara stood completely still, letting the warm ocean water pull the sand out from under her feet. She thought about the catering van. She thought about the freezing rain. She thought about the crumpled $100 bill Tristan had violently thrown at her chest, telling her to buy a decent outfit so she would not look like a peasant and embarrass his pristine reputation. He had treated her like garbage when he was standing on top of the world. Now he was begging for basic soap from a federal prison phone bank. Clara let out a soft, genuine laugh. The sound was bright, melodic, and entirely devoid of pity. "Sorry, Tristan." Clara replied, her voice smooth, articulate, and completely devoid of warmth. I am incredibly busy right now. I highly suggest you try asking one of those 30 investors you defrauded. I hear they have excellent financial advice. She did not wait for his response. She pressed the red button, ending the call instantly. With 3 swift taps on the glass screen, she permanently blocked the federal penitentiary's outgoing number. Clara tossed the sleek smartphone directly into her woven beach bag, silencing the last remaining echo of the Wilson family. She turned her face up toward the brilliant Hawaiian sun, feeling the intense heat radiate across her skin. She stepped forward, wading deeper into the crystal-clear, welcoming waters of the Pacific Ocean. She was completely free, entirely victorious, and absolutely untouchable.
I used to ride upon your shoulders, thinking you could touch the sky. Every road felt less uncertain when I saw the world through your eyes. You were stronger than the mountains, taller than the northern pines. And when the winter winds were coming, you would stand between them and I. Time kept moving like the river, years slipped slowly out to sea. But no matter where life took me, you were always part of me. I am my father's daughter, in every step I take, in every time I choose to stand. When it's easier to break, I carry your courage in my heart, your fire inside my soul. And though the years keep moving on, your love still leads me home. You taught me strength is not in power, but in kindness when it's hard. You taught me how to keep on going when the road grows cold and dark. Every lesson, every story, every laugh around the flame lies within me like an echo, calling softly through my name. And when I face my greatest battles, when I feel I can't go on, I can hear your voice beside me saying, child, you're stronger than you know. I am my father's daughter, in every step I take, in every time I choose to stand. When it's easier to break, I carry your courage in my heart, your fire inside my soul. And though the years keep moving on, your love still leads me home. One day the snow will cover footprints, one day the fire will burn low. But the things a father gives his daughter are the things that never go. Not the gold or not the stories, not the battles that he won, but the quiet way he loved her and the woman she becomes. I am my father's daughter, and I always will remain. Through every triumph, every loss, through every joy and every pain, the world may change around me, the stars may fade apart, and answer softly.